Chapter 517. It was not surprising that girls in this era lacked certain aspects of education. In fact, even after thousands of years, this aspect was still a taboo for children that could not be easily touched. Li just told the proud Lolita that this was something that a girl must experience in her life and would not die. He didn't tell her more details. He didn't have the idea of universal education for children in the Jing Kingdom. It should be known that this was also a controversial issue in the 21st century. Universal sex education here. Unless you plan to be the enemy of the whole world. Even when the princess called for women to delay the marriage age for 3 years, countless old stubborn people opposed it. Tell the children how they were born. Even the coffins of those dead old stubborn people would not be able to hold them down. However, after such a thing happened, the proud Lolita had to go back to the palace, which made Li feel relieved. Finally, he could get rid of this little witch and have a few days of peace. So he had time to pay attention to some other things. Miss Zheng's underwear seemed to have made a lot of progress, but unfortunately, she didn't let him see it. She didn't let him see it when she was wearing it, or when she was taking it off. Li went to her room twice, but he didn't even enter her door. He didn't know what sin he had committed in his previous life to meet such an employee, who was even more arrogant than the boss. Anyway, he didn't plan to show himself in this business. If the matter of a dignified county uncle selling women's underwear was spread out, he wouldn't be able to stay in the capital in the future. On the other hand, everything was going smoothly at the brothel. Old Man Sun seemed to be radiating the second spring of his life. He was full of energy and could not be stopped. Even Li was afraid to look at him. If something happened to him due to exhaustion, who would develop the brothel? Wanruwaching was now recuperating, which was forced by Li. Xiaozhu's task every day was to watch her, and not let her stay in the brothel for more than an hour. She only needed to participate in the decision-making of some important matters. Even in the capital, Wanruwaching and Zhengzimo were considered rich. As elders, their monthly dividends were more than enough for an ordinary family to live off for a lifetime. However, the two of them didn't care at all. They were still squeezed in this small yard. Li bought the neighboring yards and gave them all to Zhengzimo as a workshop. The female workers inside were also from the brothel. They knew each other well and had a strong sense of confidentiality. 2 women who were stronger than Feng stood at the door, but the boss didn't let them in. Now that he thought about it, his original idea had already been mostly realized. All he needed now was time. Today, he had to go to the palace to discuss with Lu Jimin about the establishment of the medical school. Her Royal Highness was fighting on the front line to save her fellow women. As the man behind her, of course, he couldn't drag her down. He needed to teach Lu Jimin about the theory of obstetrics and gynecology. Of course, because of the lack of the instruments in the future, he didn't have much to teach. He mainly taught about midwifery and sterilization. There was another important thing. When he went out in the morning, his second uncle asked him to bring a boiled chicken from the palace. The old man's mind was always so unique. The catering bureau was the private kitchen of the royal family. Could anyone bring something from there casually? It was still early. It would be cold if he cooked it too early. He would think about it when he came out later. A moment later, in the imperial physician's office, Lu Jimin and a group of imperial physicians came out to greet him. They said with a smile, "Master Li, we have been waiting for you for a long time." Li Han had been living a comfortable life these days. He couldn't remember how long it had been since he went to arithmetic class. Every day, he only needed to read a few pages of books, and the rest of the time, he could play as he wanted. Last time, he couldn't help but point out the problem that his imperial father and the ministers didn't find, and he got a lot of rewards. Although they were kept by his imperial mother said that when he grew up, she would return them to him untouched. Everything was good. He just envied Yongning and imperial sister Shaning, who could go outside the palace to play. Last time, he used a pearl to exchange for a few picture books from imperial sister Shaning. The monkey playing with a stick was much better than the naked people fighting in a hole in the wall that he accidentally found last time. He had finished reading those picture books. 5 pearls for 4 days or 4 pearls for 3 days. Liemo, That guy actually chose the latter. It was really funny. If teacher knew, it would be strange if he didn't scold him. He learned it for nothing. It would be great if he could go out of the palace. Imperial Sister Shawning said that there were a lot of fun things that he hadn't played before. Your Highness Prince Jean, have you finished reading that book? A voice suddenly sounded behind him. Prince Jean shivered and slowly turned his head. When he saw the figure standing behind him, he stammered, "Yes, sir. There are still a few pages that I haven't read." "And take your time. There's no hurry." Li nodded. He had to admit that there were still geniuses in this world. Prince Jean said that there were still a few pages that he hadn't read, which meant that he had already understood the previous pages. It had only been a few days. This speed was actually very scary. Li Han nodded in a daze. He felt flattered. Teacher was actually so kind today. Li looked at him and asked, "Do you know that His Majesty wants the princes to study in the Mathematics Academy?" Prince Jean nodded. "Learn addition and subtraction within 10 with them?" Li asked again. Prince Jean nodded again, but then shook his head violently. He had stopped learning addition and subtraction within 10 months. It was childish. In his opinion, there was nothing more childish than addition and subtraction within 10. "How about you teach them?" Li guided him patiently. Teach who?" Prince Jean asked. Perhaps the teacher was unexpectedly gentle today, so he asked. Li looked at him and said, "Consider them the new students of the Mathematics Academy." Prince Jean was stunned for a moment. Then he shook his head repeatedly. "No, I can't. How can I teach others? It's too difficult." Although Prince Jean was only a 10-year-old child, he had no problem teaching students who had never been exposed to the new mathematics. "Is it difficult?" Li looked at him and asked. "Compared with the book you are reading now, which one is more difficult?" "It's difficult to teach others," Prince Jean said hesitantly. "How difficult?" Li couldn't give up on this little fatty. He didn't plan to be a supervisor of the academy for the rest of his life. When Prince Jean was able to take charge, he could retire in peace. However, according to the current situation, the little fatty still had a long way to go before he could take charge of the academy. "It's difficult," Prince Jean said while gritting his teeth. "Fatty must die. It may be heavier than Mount Tai or other mountains." Li patted him on the shoulder and said, "Which mountain do you want it to be heavier than? Mount Tai or other mountains? What's the difference?" Prince Jin's fat face showed some confusion. "Mount Tai is the head of the 5 mountains. It's heavier than other mountains." Li looked at him and said, "There are valuable deaths and useless deaths. Besides, I'm not asking you to die. Think about it. If you become a teacher, you will be the superintendent of the Mathematics Academy, and you will decide how many little red flowers you will get. If anyone disobeys you, you will beat him with a board. If you don't like someone, you will give him a hard time. If I don't like someone, I will give him a hard time?" Prince Jin's eyes lit up. "You are the superintendent of the Mathematics Academy. Everything is up to you. You can give people a hard time, even if they are teachers of the Mathematics Academy." Li nodded. Prince Jean looked up at Li with a strange light flashing in his eyes. "Okay." Chapter 518. You are worth teaching. Li was very satisfied with the little fatty's performance. He patted him on the head and said, "Today, I will have the textbooks you will be teaching sent to the palace. You should familiarize yourself with the content in the next few days, and think about how to teach them." Monarch Jean raised his head and asked expectantly, "Can I really be the superintendent? You are a prince and a teacher of the School of Mathematics. As long as your mathematics skills are much better than others, who would dare to object to you being the superintendent?" Li felt like a big bad wolf now. However, the name of superintendent did not sound good. It sounded like a eunuch in charge of the School of Mathematics. It was inauspicious. The mention of the word always reminded him of Changda's old face. Next time, he suggested to the old emperor that he should change the title of superintendent to dean. "Superintendent?" Monarch Jean nodded fiercely. "I will." Li suddenly sniffed and asked, "What's that smell?" Monarch Jean was startled. Then, he waved the food box in his hand and said, "I just got the poached chicken from the dining hall. I haven't had time to eat it yet. Poached chicken. Li looked at the food box in Li Han's hand and murmured, "You are so fat at such a young age. How will you look in the future?" As a teacher, he not only had to care about his students' studies, but he also had to care about their lives and health. Li touched Monarch Jin's head and said, "In the future, you should exercise more and eat more fruits and less meat. Only with a strong body will you have the strength to learn more advanced mathematics." Monarch Jin looked at the teacher's back as he walked away. His hands were empty. The poached chicken that he pretended to be in the food box had flown away. He swallowed his saliva, and his face showed confusion again. "Didn't I say that it's better to be heavier?" In the political hall, Emperor Jing was expressionless. All the officials were silent. The Princess Royal Highness frowned, and a white-haired old man in front of the hall was spitting. "Ridiculous, this is ridiculous." The old man's face was filled with anger. He waved his sleeve and said, "Obey your father at home. Obey your husband when married. Obey your son when your husband is dead. These are the three. Marriage is an important matter. How can it be treated as a child's play? A girl not getting married at the age of 16 is an evil act that will shake the foundation of the country. Your Majesty, please reconsider." Emperor Jing remained silent, and the officials did not speak either. The entire court had clearly become the old man's one-man show. All the officials and generals in the court looked at each other, then at the old man who was still talking, and continued to remain silent. The Empress and Her Royal Highness the eldest princess asked for permission for the women to delay the age of marriage until after the age of 16. They also urged the Imperial Physician Bureau to do many things to reduce the possibility of a woman dying from a difficult birth. This matter had already spread throughout the entire capital. From the noble ladies to the common women, there was no one who was not grateful. Her Royal Highness the eldest princess had an unparalleled reputation among the women of the capital. Even they shuddered when they saw the statistics. Women giving birth was the gate of death. This was a well-known fact. However, no one had thought that the crux of the matter was the age of childbirth. The population was important, but this matter involved the empress and the eldest princess. Even the emperor seemed to have a tacit attitude, other than those highly respected scholars who dared to say anything. Besides, who didn't have a girl in their family? One wrong word, and the women in the family would probably rebel. Shaking the foundation of the country? Isn't great scholar Han being too alarmist? Emmingzu looked at the old man and said in a cold voice, "When a woman gets married at the age of 13, 3 or 4 out of 10 will die from a difficult birth. If it is delayed by 3 years, it will be reduced to less than 10%. If it is supplemented by the scientific midwifery methods of the Imperial Physician Bureau, it will be even lower. If this is carried out, how many less women will there be in the world? Besides, after this is carried out, it can also encourage women of the right age to have more children. The court will give additional subsidies to increase the population. How can this shake the foundation of the country?" Because she knew that this matter would encounter a lot of resistance, Emmingzu had already made preparations before entering the court. If something goes wrong without confirmation, who can bear the responsibility? Great scholar Han faced Emperor Jing and said loudly, "Women are not allowed to participate in politics. This is an ancestral rule. How can women talk nonsense in the court?" Mingzhu's expression gradually turned cold. She asked, "Great scholar Han, do you want to disregard the lives of the young women of the Jing kingdom?" The old man said passionately, "Men are the masters and women are the assistants. It is the duty of a woman to bear children for her husband and carry on the family line for her husband. The royal family should set an example for the world. Why is Her Royal Highness unmarried at the age of 18? Is this the example of the royal family?" One was the eldest princess of the court, and the other was a famous scholar. The two of them opposed each other fiercely and did not give in to each other. The court officials looked at each other. Although the princess was a woman, she did not lose to a man in terms of toughness. Great scholar Han was also famous for being stubborn. He had repeatedly obstructed the emperor's new policies. Even the two prime ministers lowered their heads and did not speak. There was no one else who dared to reprimand the royal family in the court like this except for him. Are you saying that I, a woman, was born to be a tool to carry on the family line? And a woman's life is not important? Mingzhu's eyes flashed coldly as she looked at the old man and asked. The old man said righteously, "For the sake of the country, what's wrong with making some sacrifices? Old thing, say one more word." Under the gaze of Emperor Jing and the officials, the eldest princess pointed at Great Scholar Han's nose and said something that made everyone dumbfounded. Great Scholar Han's face was pale, and his lips were trembling. As a great scholar, he was called an old thing by a princess in front of the emperor and the court officials. Among the great scholars of the Jing kingdom, besides him, who else had such treatment? As a princess, how can you say such filthy words? His body was trembling, and his voice was also trembling. Her Highness did not say a word, and walked straight to Great Scholar Han's side. Emperor Jing's expression suddenly changed, and he said, Quickly stop Mingzhu." By the time they realized that something was wrong, the guards had already come in from outside the door. Everyone knew Her Highness's temper. Although she was usually gentle and humble, if she was really angry, it was possible that she would kill Great Scholar Han with a sword in the court. Fortunately, weapons were not allowed in the Golden Hall. A guard stood in front of Mingzhu and said in panic, "Your Highness, you can't." Then he stopped in his tracks, as if he remembered something, and looked at the saber at his waist. Coincidentally, Mingzhu also looked in that direction. Swoosh! A silver stripe flashed, and the court officials only saw a bright light in front of them. Great Scholar Han fell to the ground on his butt. His hair was messy, and his bun was untied. His white hair danced in the air. Some of the court officials' legs were already trembling. Her Highness, she really dared to do it. Although she only chopped off Great Scholar Han's hair. This was the Golden Hall. Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne, rubbed his eyebrows and said, "We will discuss this matter tomorrow. Someone come, take Her Highness away, and summon the imperial physician." Great Scholar Han was supported to the imperial physician's office, and Her Highness was also taken away. It was not wrong to use weapons in the court, and behead was not an exaggeration. However, the person who did it was Her Highness, so the result was different. Great Scholar Han did not think through his words just now. Women were only tools to carry on the family line. So a woman's life was not important? Her Highness was not a woman. Her Majesty the Empress was not a woman? Great Scholar Han's mother was not a woman? No one knew how His Majesty would punish Her Highness, but Great Scholar Han's nightmare had just begun. Thinking of Her Highness's influence among the women in the capital, everyone's heart trembled. Emperor Jing's face was gloomy, the officials whispered, and the censors rubbed their palms. The court was in a mess because of Her Highness's stunning saber strike. Pfft! Li Yi spat all the water in his mouth onto Li Xian's face. He asked in shock, "What did you say? Mingzhu killed Great Scholar Han in the court?" Chapter 519. I didn't chop him to death. Li Xian shook his head and said, "It's just a rumor. I didn't see it with my own eyes. It said that Great Scholar Han dodged quickly and only cut off some of his hair. He was not injured, but he was scared. I heard that he peed his pants." Dodged quickly? Li Yi shook his head. If Mingzhu really wanted to chop an old man, who couldn't even walk properly, how could he dodge it? He looked at Li Xian again and asked, "Is he really a great scholar to say that in front of so many officials?" Li Xian thought about it and said, "Great Confucian Han has some knowledge, but he's very stubborn and inflexible. He's conservative, and has criticized Uncle Huang's decrees many times. Although it was proven that he was wrong in the end, this bad habit of his never changed. But this time he obviously chose the wrong person. You don't know that when King of Shu and several princes were young, they secretly cut off a strand of Mingzhu's hair. She broke 2 of King of Shu's ribs in front of concubine Shui. None of those princes were left behind. They still avoid her when they see her." Li Yi shook his head. Even an old man had to be smart. It was normal for women to have a low social status in this society, but not everything could be said. In order to control her marriage, Her Royal Highness had just awakened her feminist consciousness. She would kill anyone who stood in her way. The old man actually dared to mention why she was not married in the court. Wasn't he tired of living? It seemed that the level of the great scholar in the Jing kingdom was really uneven. It was not that one could be called a great scholar after reading more books and being a little older. They should really set up an assessment system for the great scholar. Those who were unqualified would have their licenses revoked. Those who didn't have a license would have been arrested. And those who had a license would have their licenses revoked again. Where's the princess? She hasn't been arrested and sent to the Supreme Court, has she? Li Yi turned to ask Li Xian. The social impact of attacking a great scholar in the Golden Palace in front of the emperor and all the civil and military officials was too serious. It was much more serious than the last time he beat King of Shu. Li Xian shook his head and said, "No, Uncle Huang grounded her in the morning dew hall." Li Yi was stunned. Wasn't the morning dew hall Mingzhu's bedroom? What was the difference between this and no punishment? Is there no objection from the imperial court? Yes, the imperial court is about to fall into chaos. Li Xian said helplessly. The eldest princess of a country injured someone in the Golden Palace. The imperial censors are going crazy. The memorials to impeach her are like snowflakes. So be it. Li Yi used his own experience to understand that the so-called impeachment was just a quarrel between some unimportant people. The final decision was still in the hands of the old emperor. Great scholar Han had only peed, not died. What could the old emperor do to his daughter? I still have to think of something. Li Xian furrowed his brows and said. Early this morning, the rumor that the princess killed a great scholar in the court spread in the marketplace. The people of Jingdo are all waiting to watch the show. If this continues, it will not be good for her. Once the rumor spreads, even Uncle Huang will not be able to blindly protect her. Rumor? Li Yi pursed his lips. The expression on his face was somewhat disdainful. For most of the people in Jingdo, today was still a very ordinary day. They woke up early and were busy. When they had time, they would go to the brothel to listen to the opera and songs. If they had the time, they would go to the brothel to relax. The girls in the jadeite courtyard were getting better and better at having fun. The way they dressed and the way they moved made one forget to go home. If it weren't for the explosive news from the palace, this kind of ordinary life would continue. Her Highness the eldest princess attacked great scholar Han in court. Her Highness the eldest princess cut off great scholar Han's hair in the Golden Palace. Her Highness the eldest princess cut off great scholar Han's head in front of the emperor and all the officials in court. Her Highness the eldest princess killed great scholar Han in court this morning. News related to the royal family had always been the focus of the people's attention. When this news came out, the entire Jingdo immediately went into an uproar. It was impossible for ordinary people to come into contact with the affairs of the royal family and the royal family. Once the words princess, court, and murder were spread, it became #eldest princess murder in court hashtag. With its own repost topic, it instantly spread throughout Jingdo. This must be fake. Murder in court? How is that possible? That's right. How could the eldest princess murder someone? Her Highness defeated the people of the Qi kingdom last time. She has brought honor to our Jing kingdom. But how could the news from the palace be fake? I heard that the princess has been locked up. The censors are all frantically impeaching her. No, I still don't believe it. I have to go to the brothel and ask. The status of the eldest princess in the hearts of the people was higher than that of most of the princes. As the only woman among the three heroes of Jingdo, she had crushed the conspiracy of the people of the Qi kingdom and saved the face of the country. Her outstanding strength, beauty, and wisdom had attracted countless fans in Jingdo. Although the news was explosive, and the news of the eldest princess killing someone had spread like wildfire, the people in Jingdo were generally of a higher quality. They would have their own judgment when they encountered something, let alone such a thing that sounded like a fantasy story. For them, how to distinguish between rumors and facts? They only needed to go to the brothel and listen. We don't produce rumors, we're just the transporters of facts. This was the principle of some of the brothels in the capital. Compared to the black brothels that talked nonsense and used rumors and sex to attract people, those brothels were simply a clean stream. Because they never believed in rumors and didn't spread rumors, the storytellers often criticized the evils of the times with reason and evidence. Gradually, they gained the trust of the people in the capital. Not long after, someone came out of the brothel with a look of realization on his face. So that's how it is. Great Scholar Han didn't die. He just wet his pants out of fear. Her Highness did use a knife. But, if she was a woman, she probably couldn't help but hack that so-called great scholar to death, right? No matter what, it is taboo to use weapons in the court. Her Highness is in big trouble this time. Rumors were rumors after all. Some people came out of the brothel. And at the same time, some people learned the truth from other channels. Great Scholar? How dare he say such things? Her Majesty the Empress is also a woman, and so is Great Scholar Han's mother. Does he have the guts to say such things in front of them? A tea seller on the street shook his head and said, "Damn it, Her Majesty the Divine Empress is also a woman. How dare that Han insult Her Majesty?" On the street, a young man in ragged clothes, but with a sharp gaze cursed in a low voice. Why do I feel that he is right? What are women for if they don't bear children? In a butcher's shop, the butcher had just said one sentence when he felt a sharp pain in his waist. He was kicked out of the shop. The ground shook a few times, and the mountain-like woman walked out of the shop with a furious expression. "You heartless person. So this old lady was born to bear children for you." The butcher's expression changed a few times, and he hurriedly explained, No, listen to my explanation." I won't listen. The woman shook her head fiercely, and the flesh on her body trembled. She angrily cursed. "This old lady's life isn't important. This old lady will sit on you and kill you." The ground shook again, and the surrounding men suddenly found it difficult to breathe. Their lips were dry, and their faces turned pale. Chapter 520. Tell me, how could Her Royal Highness kill people? Is she still a woman? The hunchbacked old woman walked along the wall with a basket in her hand. She shook her head and sighed. She had just heard the news when she was buying groceries. She heard that people's heads were chopped off and rolled a few feet away. Even Qin Xiang's face was covered in blood. It was scary just thinking about it. When she walked to a certain place, she was blocked by the crowd. She saw a group of young girls gathered around the wall. They stuck their heads out and chattered about something. "What's going on?" The old woman pulled a young woman and asked. "It's Grandma, son." The young woman looked inside and said, "It's the government's notice. It says that it's best for us women to have children after the age of 16. Otherwise, it's easy to have a difficult birth. I heard that 3 out of 10 women who have children at the age of 13 or 14 don't survive." The woman touched her chest and said with lingering fear, "Isn't that right? I remember when I gave birth to our Ming-er, I was only 14. I was half a step into the gates of hell. It wasn't easy to save my life, and I was sick for half a year. Look at that girl from the Chen family. She only got married at 18, and only gave birth 3 years after she got married. She was laughed at because of this, but other people can walk the next day after giving birth. Her Royal Highness is still the best. She spoke for us women. She said that we can only get married after the age of 16, so that we can have a good birth. She also asked the imperial doctor to help us think of a way. In the future, it won't be so scary to have children. Unlike that guy surnamed Han. He said that the role of us women is to give birth to children." Her Royal Highness was so angry that she took a knife to scare him. She was even locked up by His Majesty. "Tell me, why is there no reason for us women in this world?" She wanted to say something more, but was pulled by the people next to her. A woman came over and whispered, "Don't talk too much, Grandma son. Grandma son's 13-year-old daughter died a few days ago due to a difficult birth." Ah! The woman's expression changed, and she didn't dare to speak anymore. The old woman stood there in a daze. The basket in her hand fell to the ground. After a moment, a cry suddenly came from the crowd. "My poor Lian. My Xiaofeng just got pregnant a few days ago. She's only 13. At the edge of the crowd, another woman's expression changed. For the men of the capital, today was destined to be an unforgettable day. He did not know why his wife, who was usually gentle and virtuous, had a sorrowful expression on her face today. She did not speak much. She was usually irritable and easily angered, but today, she became even more severe. If she did something wrong, she would be reprimanded, and if it was serious, she would be beaten and scolded. Rumor had it that Butcher Zhang, who lived in the east of the city, was straddled by his fierce wife on the street. Butcher Zhang's wife was even sturdier than his family's pigs. Rumor had it that old Zhang fainted on the spot, and was now clamoring to divorce his wife. Also, when a group of women walked past the door just now, the old woman who was walking in front was crying, and saying something like, "Old thief Han, give me back my daughter." Those women were all panting with rage, and they didn't look like they were easy to deal with. What were they doing? Could it be that old thief Han had defiled this old woman's daughter, and she was going to go to his door to seek justice? This was really going to be a good show to watch. Thus, many people walked out of their homes and followed those women. In the indoor playground of the Li residence, Fong was bare-chested, and with one hand, he was rocking the improved rocking car. His face was not red, and he was not panting. The palace guard outside the door stared at him with his eyes wide open. He had tried that thing before, and it required 2 hands to swing it with great difficulty. It didn't take long before he couldn't stand it anymore. But this man, this arm strength, if he were to hit him with a punch, even a black bear would die. Fong had been rocking the rocking car with one hand for almost an hour. This was his daily homework. Even if the little girl wasn't here, he could casually throw a heavy object on the car, and he would be rocking it for several hours. At this moment, the expression on his face was somewhat gloomy. His wife, old Su's wife, and a few others went to the streets to buy jewelry. And when they came back, it was as if they had changed into different people. The way they looked at him was a little strange. If he hadn't sneaked away early, he would have been chased out of the house by his wife with a broom in hand, just like old Su. Could it be that she found out that I hid some money to buy bracelets for Little Red? Just as Fong was panicking, a few servant girls in the residence also gathered together and whispered, "I heard that women can only have children after the age of 16. Is that true?" A servant girl gossiped. Another servant girl curled her lips and said, "Nonsense. I have a distant cousin who got married at the age of 13 and gave birth a few months later. Is it okay? I heard that it's not good for women to have children too early, and it's easy for them to suffer from chronic diseases," a servant girl said. That servant girl shook her head and said, "The chronic diseases didn't. It's just that she died because of a difficult birth." Xiao Huan hid behind them with a pale face. Hearing this, she couldn't listen anymore. She coughed lightly and said, "What are you all doing here? Hurry up and go to work. If you continue to be lazy, your pay will be deducted." The servant girls were already familiar with this lady's servant girl, and knew that she was just scaring them. Xiao Qing, who was bold, went over and whispered, "Sister Xiao Huan, when do you think our Lord Zhu will take you in as a concubine? What are you talking about?" Xiao Huan's pretty face blushed. She grabbed the corner of her clothes and said shyly, I will only be 16 in a few months." Her Royal Highness was grounded in the Morning Dew Hall, and couldn't step out of the hall. Li Yi stood at the door of the Morning Dew Hall. When he was about to enter, he was stopped by the guards at the door. "Apologies, County Uncle Li. Her Royal Highness is still grounded. No one can enter." The guard's attitude towards him was still very good. "Can't you make an exception?" Li Yi took out the Secret Intelligence Division sign and said, "Apologies, sir. This subordinate really can't let you in." The guard smiled bitterly. "All right then." Li Yi waved his hand. He was only a small guard and considered his subordinate. It was better not to make things difficult for him. Not long after, the guard's expression was troubled. "Princess, Her Royal Highness, you." The proud Lolita raised her little face and said, "I can't go in." Yes. The guard weighed in his heart whether he could afford to offend this young lady or not. In the next moment he immediately nodded. His Majesty only grounded the eldest princess. He didn't say that others couldn't visit. In principle, even if he let Princess Shining in, it wouldn't be disobeying orders. As soon as he turned around, he saw Li Yi, who had his arms crossed, and was looking at him with a mocking expression. Grounded? Li Yi looked at the guard. No one can go in. The guard's face was full of embarrassment. Seeing that Li Yi had already walked into the hall, he hurriedly said, Sir, you can't take this wine in. Is this wine? Li Yi glanced at him and said, This is a new perfume. It's for Her Royal Highness to try. The guard watched him walk in, and his expression became even more bitter. With such a prodigal woman at home, when would she release a new perfume? What flavor it would be, how much it would cost, and how much he could save from the membership price. Didn't he know? Besides, who would use a wine jar to contain perfume? To say the least, he was carrying something wrapped in lotus leaves in his other hand. The fragrance could be smelled from afar. Who would dare to say that it wasn't the beggar's chicken that was popular in the capital a few days ago? In the spacious courtyard of the rear hall of the Morning Dew Hall, Princess Royal Highness was dressed in a slim suit, which undoubtedly revealed her exquisite figure. Even Li Yi couldn't see the sword dance in her hand. Her movements were smooth and casual, and she didn't seem to be grounded at all. Seeing Li Yi come in, she put down her sword and walked straight over. She took the wine jar in his hand, opened it, and raised her head to drink it. It's not easy to take egg fried rice. Just make do with it. Li Yi tore off a chicken leg and handed it to her. The other one had already been snatched by the proud Lolita, since she learned from Li Yi that she wouldn't get fat no matter how much she ate these days. Her mouth was rarely idle. Chapter 521. Next time, bring egg fried rice. The princess was not satisfied with the combination of beggar's chicken and liquor. She raised her head and took another sip, then tilted her head and said to Li Yi, There won't be a next time. Li Yi thought to himself, What kind of taste is egg fried rice and liquor? He wiped the grease off his hands and said, Scholar Han fell ill, not because of you, but because of anger. Yesterday afternoon, nearly 100 women blocked the gate of Han's house. The leading old woman said that Scholar Han killed her daughter and sat on the threshold of Han's house and cried for 2 hours. Everyone in the capital knew about it. After what happened in the court spread, the gate of Han's house was splashed with feces, and the wall was painted with Old Thief Han and Traitor of the Nation. Disregarding the lives of women, this alone can make his reputation plummet, and even his students have nothing to do with him. If it weren't for the intervention of the government, I'm afraid that even the gate of Han's house would have been torn down. Scholar Han fell ill last night. I heard that he almost couldn't breathe. The name of Old Thief Han has been confirmed. Now all the women in the capital are trying to ask His Majesty to pardon you. Li Yi told Mingzu all the developments from yesterday to today. The whole capital, from the government to the people, saw the power of women for the first time. It turned out that they were not as weak as they looked on the surface, and they also had the ability to stir up a storm. Li Yi did not expect this matter to have such a dramatic development. In fact, the brothel only told the people the truth. There was no embellishment, nor any artistic manipulation. The biggest effect was to let the people know the truth in the shortest time possible. Splashing feces at the door and spraying paint on the wall. Who came up with this idea? They didn't even need to be taught. Women had always been a weak group, and were bound by women's morality. Not to mention marriage, many people didn't even have freedom. Of course, there were some fierce women, but in general, it was a fact that women were weak. And this was also a tradition for thousands of years. It was determined by productivity. Men were noble, and women had to lower their heads and serve their husbands and children for a lifetime. Perhaps even most women themselves thought so. This concept had not been completely reversed, even in the later generations where men and women were equal. However, where there was oppression, there would be resistance. Especially after being oppressed for a long time. When the resistance came, it would be especially intense. It wasn't easy for someone to stand up for women. All the women had been hoping that the princess would really do something for them. After being stirred up by great scholar Han, everyone's anger erupted. Hundreds and thousands of years of repression erupted, and something called women's rights began to awaken. Now that things had developed to this point, it was no longer just a matter of early marriage. Emingzu put down the wine jar and wiped her mouth in a magnanimous manner. Having such a stubborn old man in the imperial court will only bring more harm than good. At this moment, the imperial court is probably in an uproar. Not only the ordinary women, but the women of the noble families are also complaining. They are all going to the empress to remonstrate. Some of the concubines even reported the matter to the Empress Dowager. Even the Empress Dowager, who has been cultivating Buddhism for a long time, specially sent a decree to ask His Majesty. Li looked at her and said, "If this continues, I'm afraid it won't end well." This was all what Li heard on the way here. It was already a big matter to use a knife against an official in the imperial court, and it involved the eldest princess. Coupled with the chaos of the Han family yesterday, it would be a wonder if the imperial court was peaceful today. Did you really not do what happened to the Han family? The eldest princess glanced at him and said. Li was stunned for a moment and said angrily, "Do I look like that kind of person? It doesn't matter. I'm not blaming you." Her Highness patted his shoulder and said, "It's all that Han guy's fault." Thank you. Li's guess was right. Today, the imperial court was indeed not peaceful. It was not only Emperor Jing who had a headache. Now that things had developed to this point, the officials also felt a headache. In just one day, the entire capital was in chaos. Rumors were everywhere, and the people were angry. How His Majesty punished the eldest princess was no longer the important point. The important point was that if this went on, something big would happen. An old man held a ceremonial tablet and said righteously, "Your Majesty, the eldest princess has no regard for the law. In the imperial court, she publicly committed violence and assassinated an official in front of the civil and military officials and His Majesty. This behavior is so vile that it will not appease the people if she is not severely punished." All the officials shook their heads. Even now he was still holding on to this matter. Did this old man not understand the situation? Great scholar Han had already been cursed by the people. The problem now was not how to punish the eldest princess, but how to appease the people's anger. Great scholar Han's words yesterday had completely pushed the imperial court to the opposite side of the people. The purpose of women's existence was to give birth? The lives of women were not important? Otherwise, why would the imperial court insist on early marriage and early childbirth, knowing that women could easily die from dystocia if they married early? Did the imperial court not see women as human beings? No one could take the blame for this. They could not, and His Majesty could not. Now it was only the capital. After a few days, when the news spread to the other counties, the impact would be even greater. At that time, it would really be chaos. Didn't he see that even the imperial censors had calmed down and didn't mention the matter of the eldest princess anymore? At this delicate moment, if this old official still couldn't understand the situation, then official Han would be a good example. Deputy Minister Ma stood in the crowd and lowered his head in silence. Not only him, but all the censors in the imperial censor had been given a death order. Today, in the imperial court, they were not allowed to mention the eldest princess again. He knew the situation in the capital better than anyone else. After this matter, great scholar Han's reputation could be said to be ruined. The status of the eldest princess in the hearts of the people of the capital, especially the women, had long reached a new height. Whoever held on to this matter would be like great scholar Han, nailed to the pillar of shame by the people of the capital. He did not want to experience the feeling of being hated by the people a second time. Just when the court officials were abnormally quiet, a figure walked out. "Your Majesty, the only thing we can do now is to appease the people first, then we can discuss other things." Prime Minister Qin raised his head and slowly said, "Prime Minister Qin's words are reasonable. I second it." The old man who had just spoken had long been forgotten. After Prime Minister Qin took the lead, the court officials stood up one after another. They avoided talking about the eldest princess and pulled the topic back to the main point they should be concerned about. Emperor Jing took a deep breath. "Regarding this matter, my dear officials, do you have any suggestions?" I think that the eldest princess's remonstrance yesterday was very reasonable, Prime Minister Qin said. Although it is important to increase the population, we cannot disregard the lives of women because of this. Moreover, Her Highness has already given us a way to solve both problems. The people of the capital are already angry, and the implementation of this system cannot be delayed. Prime Minister Qin and Prime Minister Shen were the heads of all the officials. Prime Minister Shen was low-key and rarely spoke out unless it was a big matter. Most of the officials followed Prime Minister Qin. Following the Prime Minister, they would not make a big political mistake, right? As soon as Prime Minister Qin said this, countless people agreed. Seeing that everyone seemed to have a tacit understanding to avoid the eldest princess, it was indeed not the right time to mention it again. Emperor Jing, who originally wanted to easily let this matter go, had no choice but to suppress this idea. Chapter 522. In the morning dew hall, when the arrogant Lolita tore off a small piece of chicken and insisted on stuffing it into Li Yi's mouth, Li Xian strode in, and his face did not look very good. How's the situation in the court? Li Yi looked at him and asked. Li Xian was not surprised to see Li Yi here. He said with a slightly angry tone, postpone the age of marriage for women to 16 years old, encourage women of the right age to have more children, urge the Imperial Physician Bureau to improve the method of midwifery, and train professional midwives. These are settled, and will be implemented soon. Li Yi thought that in this way, with the help of this trend, he could open a high-end confinement club in the capital. Wouldn't he make a lot of money? However, these things that Li Xian just said were what Her Royal Highness wanted to do. There was no reason for the court to implement the policy. Li Xian still had the same expression. Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, the princess's house arrest? Li Xian said angrily. No one has mentioned it for the time being. I'm afraid that when this storm is over, they will still not give up easily. Her Royal Highness took great credit for this matter. In the final analysis, it was also because of this matter that Her Royal Highness almost hacked great scholar Han to death in the court. It was a major event related to the people's livelihood, and it was decided in this way. However, it was a bit like burning the bridge after crossing the river. But thinking about it, it was normal. After all, Her Royal Highness was the first to hack people in the Golden Hall with a knife. It was unprecedented, and probably no one would do it in the future. If they did not punish her severely, and someone followed her example in the future, wouldn't the officials' heads be hung on their belts when they went to the court? In this case, I can only add more fuel to the fire. Li Yi stopped the arrogant Lolita from stuffing the chicken, but into his mouth and thought so. What do you think about this matter? Li Xian sat down and looked at Li Yi and asked. Mingzhu's expression did not change, but her eyes were looking at him as well. As one of the three pests of the capital, the three heroes, the most sinister and cunning among the three heroes of the capital, Li Yi thought for a bit, looked at Mingzhu, and said seriously, how about I bring you a bowl of egg-fried rice next time? The capital had not been peaceful for the past 2 days. County Magistrate Liu, who had just been promoted to the capital magistrate not long ago, was having a headache. Just now, a yamen runner came to report that there were 2 in-laws in the eastern part of the city, fighting over their children's marriage, and the matter was brought to court. Since yesterday, this was already the 5th case of in-laws turning against each other. The cause of the case was surprisingly the same. The bride said that her daughter was too young and wanted to wait for 2 to 3 years before getting married. Naturally, the groom did not agree. The betrothal gifts had already been given, and they were just waiting for the bride to marry. What was the meaning of delaying the marriage for 2 to 3 years? If the news got out, where would they put their faces? The bride also had a legitimate reason. The imperial court had said that 3 out of 10 women would not survive if they gave birth at the age of 13. My daughter is only 13 this year. If you want my daughter to marry the groom, it is equivalent to asking my daughter to die. No matter what, she is my daughter. If anyone wants to hurt her, I will scratch him to death. County Magistrate Liu touched the fingernail mark on his neck and gasped in pain. This was the result of the fight between the two families in the court yesterday. He went up to persuade the two families, but was accidentally scratched by the shrew. At night, when he was being intimate with his wife, he explained for a long time. He didn't know why, but she, who was always reasonable, became extremely grumpy these days. Not only did she not believe him, but she also framed him by saying that it was the evidence of him going out to flirt. County Magistrate Liu had no choice but to scratch himself again to show his innocence. Even now it was still burning. He began to miss the days when Liu Yi was here. How could he deal with such a small matter? The imperial court is about to issue a law. From now on, women in our Jing kingdom can only get married at the age of 16. Those who violate this law are disobeying the imperial court and the law. Ordinary people couldn't stand this kind of intimidation. After saying these words, the groom left dejectedly. The bride, on the other hand, beamed with joy and shouted that she was just and honorable, which slightly comforted County Magistrate Liu. He let out a long sigh. From the perspective of justice, the imperial court's action was good, but the real trouble was just beginning. Delaying the earliest date for a woman to get married at the age of 16 also meant that those poor families also had to raise their daughters to the age of 16. For them, this undoubtedly increased a lot of burden. How many of those people at the bottom of the social ladder would treat their daughters as real people? The imperial court's action was still thoughtless. Not only that, besides the unstable feelings of the people, there were also some aspects of the capital that had become somewhat abnormal. Behind the chaos, there seemed to be an invisible hand pushing things forward, causing people to be alarmed. The inexplicable disappearance of people in the capital, the abnormalities of several dozen families in a village outside the city, the mysterious divine empress, returning to the rear hall. County Magistrate Liu paced back and forth for almost an hour. He didn't even pay attention to the concubine that came to him of her own accord. After thinking for a while, he raised his brush and began to write on a booklet. The matter of the divine empress appearing a few days ago has already been widely spread among the believers, causing them to be even more pious. In an ordinary courtyard outside the capital, a purple-clothed man had a faint expression of excitement on his face. He said to the middle-aged Taoist nun, "In these past 2 days, my religion has gained more than 100 believers. From this, it seems that the great rise of the holy religion is just around the corner." "Very good." The middle-aged Taoist nun nodded and said, "But we can't be too ostentatious. This is the capital. If we were to arouse the alarm of the Jing Kingdom's imperial court, there would be countless troubles. This subordinate understands." The purple-clothed man bowed and said these words. Then he thought of a certain matter and said, "Reporting to the Empress, this subordinate has discovered a disciple that has recently entered the religion. His ability is extremely outstanding. Half of the newly increased believers are due to his efforts. He is also a person who witnessed the Divine Empress's second appearance. This subordinate wishes to promote him to the position of yellow-clothed emissary. What does the Empress think? For such a small matter, you can decide for yourself. As for the Assembly of Heroes, continue to pay attention to it." After saying these words, the middle-aged Taoist nun floated away. The purple-clothed man bowed and said, "Respectfully sending off the Empress. I and you will share the same bed as you and we will die in the same hole." The young imperial censor called Wan Su was humming a tune he had just learned from a brothel. As he walked into the house, he saw his wife dressed neatly and about to leave with a maid. His expression changed and he hurriedly said, "I am my wife. You can't continue fooling around with those people. The matters of Her Highness the Princess are none of our business." The woman opposite him waved her hand and said, "I'm not going. Rui Workshop released a new perfume today. I'm going to take a look." Wan Su heaved a sigh of relief. As long as she wasn't going to ask for advice on behalf of the princess, it was fine. If she was going to Rui Workshop to buy perfume, then he would buy it. His eyes widened. "There's a new perfume?" The young imperial censor's face revealed a sorrowful expression. His salary had just been issued this month. Forget it. If she wants to buy it, then buy it. As long as she doesn't get involved in that matter, it's fine. Anyway, I like the smell of it. He could only comfort her like this in his heart. He squeezed out a smile on his face and said, "Then, my wife, go early and come back early. Are you going to leave just like this, never see each other again?" The young imperial censor hummed a tune as he regretted his diminishing salary. "There's a new show in the brothel?" The woman didn't leave and looked at him as she asked. Oh yes." Wansu turned around and nodded his head. "What's it called?" The woman asked again as she was about to board the carriage. Wansu thought for a moment and said, "I think it's called Peacock Flies Southeast." "Yes, Peacock Flies Southeast." Wansu nodded his head and said with absolute certainty. Note: the tune Imperial Censor One is humming is an excerpt from the opera Peacock Flies Southeast. Chapter 523. Have you been to the Jade Yard recently? No, what's wrong? Is there a new girl in the Jade Yard? There's no new girl, but there are a lot of new styles. It's a pity that you didn't go. Tell me. My husband went back to his parents' home today. I'll go and have a look tonight. Tsk. What the girls in the Jade Yard are wearing now is called seductive. Do you know they don't wear undergarments now? That's called bras. Oh no, I have to buy some for my wife. Li Yi was a little stunned when he saw two young men deliberately raising their voices to discuss something on the street, attracting the attention of many people in the same field. Who hired these actors? Their acting skills were poor, exaggerated, and their lines were not deep at all. Could they be any more fake? When he was thinking about this, he saw a man suddenly came up and said in surprise, "Brother, are you talking about the most popular new underwear in the capital recently? To be honest, I also want to buy a set for my wife, but I don't know where to buy it." "Brother, I'm sure you're a kindred spirit. Then, I won't hide it from you." The man who spoke just now smiled and said, "Go straight along this road, turn left at the first intersection, turn right at the second intersection, and walk for another 10 feet or so. You'll see that shop. But only women can enter that shop. Brother, remember to bring your wife." "Oh, thank you, brother. Young master, what are they talking about?" Xiaohuan blinked and asked. "Children shouldn't ask so many questions. Let's go and watch the play," Li Yi said as he patted her head. "I'm not young anymore." The servant girl lowered her head to look at herself and muttered. Then, she quickly followed after the servant girl. Seeing that more and more people gathered there, Li Yi was surprised. The underwear reform was really carried out by her. But the marketing method was a little low. Maybe she would only realize it after suffering some losses. Passing by the shop mentioned by the man just now, he saw that the line of women outside the shop was already 3 to 5 feet long. Each of them was gorgeously dressed, and they were even throwing flirtatious glances at the men passing by, constantly urging the people in front of them to hurry up. At the door of the shop stood a woman who was even stronger than Fong. She was the one who blocked him outside the workshop and refused to let him enter. Just now, she had said that she might suffer a loss. She did not expect the shop's business to be so good. Her old face was burning with pain. She pulled Xiaohuan away quickly. If she stayed for a while longer, she might enter the shop to take a look. It didn't take long for him to realize that the majority of those people were women from brothels. Women from ordinary families wouldn't be so bold as to openly buy those shameful and intimate items. The brothels probably had no choice but to improve their core competitiveness because of the Jade Yard. If they lost to others in certain aspects as time went on, they wouldn't have enough fame, and the brothels would lose. Although the price of those small pieces of cloth was a little expensive, it couldn't stop the customers from liking them. To listen to the opera, they naturally had to listen to the most popular opera of the past few days, The Peacock Flies Southeast. The popularity of the brothel could be seen from the fact that the tickets for each show were sold out. There were a few standard brothels. Other than the ordinary shows, there was also a VIP area for women. The tickets for the VIP area were slightly more expensive, but the service was more attentive. In the summer, they provided free smoothies and cold drinks. As for the women's area, it was only recently opened. There was a difference between men and women, especially for women. They couldn't squeeze in with so many men in a crowded place. The one who first suggested this idea was rewatching. Among the women, there were actually quite a few who liked to listen to opera. They were more emotional, and they were more partial to operas that depicted love like The Cowherd, and The Weaver Girl, and The Peacock Flies Southeast. When Li Yi and Xiao Huan walked into the brothel, they saw many women with masks covering their faces coming in and out. From their clothes, they didn't look like ordinary people. Today, Rui was invited by the crown princess. These few days they had a lot of gatherings. Naturally, Mississippi Lu was busy every day. Even Yongning was invited to stay in the palace for 2 days by the old emperor. In her boredom, she could only bring Xiao Huan out to watch the opera. The Peacock Flies Southeast was a recent opera. It was about the Eastern Han Dynasty. The talented and beautiful Lu Lanji and Lu River's petty official Jiao Zhongqing were sincerely in love. However, her mother-in-law, Jiao Zhongqing, was not able to bear a child for 2 to 3 years. Lu Lanji resolutely asked to return. Jiao Zhongqing's pleas to her mother were in vain. The couple could only bid farewell, and both of them swore that heaven would not betray each other. After Lu Lanji returned home, her evil brother forced her to marry. Helpless, she agreed to marry the governor's son. Jiao Zhongqing rushed over when he heard the news. The couple promised to meet in the netherworld. On the day of Lanji's wedding, Lu Lanji raised her body to the pond of purity, and Jiao Zhongqing hung himself on the southeast branch. Both husband and wife died for love. Before the opera began, an old storyteller first read The Peacock Flies Southeast in a hoarse and sorrowful voice. On the day the cows and horses neighed, the bride entered the green hut. After dusk the people settled down. My life ends today, my corpse remains. She took off her dress and shoes, raising her body to the pond of purity. When the official heard this, he knew that they would be parting for a long time. Wandering under the garden tree, hanging himself on the southeast branch. Before the opera began, Xiao Huan was already hugging Li Yi's arm and sobbing softly. Young Master Lanji is so pitiful. That old granny, why is she so bad? A good love story. Shouldn't the ending be 2 people getting back together again, and living happily for the rest of their lives? One raised her body to the pond of purity. The other hung himself on the southeast branch. It was really pitiful. Li patted the little servant girl's shoulder to comfort her. It was a little pitiful, but there was nothing he could do. If it wasn't pitiful, how could he move more people? If it wasn't pitiful, how could he cause many women to reflect on their own status and have the slightest desire to rebel against feudal ethics and feudal etiquette? If it wasn't pitiful, how could this fire burn even brighter? It was said that scholars were mostly angry youths. They dared to write anything, especially novels and plays. There was no lack of rebellious people. The scale was so big that it made people speechless. He didn't know what this nameless person was thinking. Did she think that the recent period was not too sensitive? What was her intention in writing such a thing? Was she not afraid of being checked? Was she trying to expose the man-eating nature of feudal etiquette and passionately praise Lu Lanji and Jiao Zhongqing's loyalty to love and rebellious spirit of resisting oppression? Or was she trying to express the people's passionate yearning for the freedom of love and marriage? Especially when she created Lu Lanji, a typical image of an ancient woman who had reached the peak of being loyal to her family, but could only meet a tragic end. She hinted at the tragic fate of women in feudal society. What would the women who watched the opera think? Li Yi sighed and said, "She has ulterior motives, ulterior motives." Chapter 524. The laws of the Jing Kingdom did not convict people based on words. As long as one did not seek death to the point of inciting rebellion, writing about the current emperor and general Su Dingyuan Longyang, or fabricating some kind of impure rumor to deliberately smear the reputation of important officials of the court, the government would not care. Furthermore, because of their profession, they could be more open-minded in places like the brothels. They could ridicule the imperial court or criticize the country's policies. No one would care about that. Some black-hearted brothels even deliberately used false rumors as a gimmick to attract customers. However, no matter how arrogant they were, they would always have scruples. Even if they really wanted to express their thoughts, they would be very vague. John Doe was very insidious. He simply wanted to see the world in chaos. By writing such plays, it was obvious that he wanted to stir up the emotions of the women in the capital. Behind this, even Li himself would not believe that there was no conspiracy behind it. It was said that he anonymously submitted 2 plays to Old Sun yesterday. One was called Romance of the Western Chamber, and the other seemed to be called The Peony Pavilion. They both reflected the rebellious phenomenon of young women breaking the shackles of feudal ethics and pursuing freedom and love. On a deeper level, it would probably arouse the women to reflect on their status in society. Maybe a vigorous women's rights movement would appear. With such a grand scheme, what was the intention of this John Doe? As the big boss behind the brothels, a good citizen of the Jing Kingdom, and one of the top 10 outstanding youths of the country in the second year of the Jinghe period, could he spread such plays that disturbed the stability of the country and destroyed the harmony of society, and let the evil plan of the John Doe succeed? The answer was obvious. Xiao Huan wiped her tears while listening to the play. In the women's theater next door, there was also a play called The Peacock Flies to the Southeast. There were almost no empty seats in the hall. It was unknown how many women recalled their love that had died before it had even sprouted. Under the curtains, their eyes were already full of tears. Lu Lanji's tragic fate resonated with many people. As women, was their fate destined to be like this? Her Royal Highness was the first to stand up for women. But now, Her Royal Highness was imprisoned in the palace, and even the most basic freedom was taken away. After Her Royal Highness, who would think for women? Should they maintain the status quo, or strive to fight for something that should belong to them? Countless women fell into confusion. This Lu Dao is also somewhat talented. Emperor Jing opened a memorial, looked at it, and nodded. If I remember correctly, he should have been the Anqi County magistrate before. Changde nodded and said, yes, Lu Dao was the former Anqi County magistrate. He was transferred to the capital a few months ago. Anqi County is full of talents. First there was Lu Yi, and now there is Lu Dao. County Magistrate Jing Lu. Emperor Jing boasted a little and said, the court officials are good at making decisions on important matters and overseeing the overall situation. It is inevitable that there will be omissions in these areas. Although Li Yi had long reminded me, other than him, only Lu Dao thought of this point. So according to what he said, this law will be enforced in Jingdo. In the other provinces and counties, the force will be slightly lighter. With that, he began to draft the edict. Suddenly, a figure walked in from outside the hall. Changde opened his mouth and was about to speak, but the woman waved her hand. He immediately closed his mouth and left without a trace. Emperor Jing finished drafting the imperial edict and found that the surrounding atmosphere was a bit strange. When he looked up, he said in surprise, why is the empress here? The beautiful woman dressed in palace attire and wearing a phoenix crown looked at Emperor Jing and said directly, Your Majesty, when do you plan to release Emingzu? Emperor Jing thought for a moment and said, the time is not right. I'm afraid that she will have to endure for a few more days. The beautiful woman frowned and said, what did Emingzu do wrong? She just wanted to do something for the women of the world. Emingzu is already suffering. If your Majesty makes things difficult for her, I will not agree. Emperor Jing said, when did I make things difficult for her? She is in the morning dew hall every day. She has wine to drink and meat to eat. Other than not being able to go out, her life is much better than mine. I just want to tell your Majesty that if you still don't release Emingzu, your Majesty will have a headache. The beautiful woman said one more sentence, and then turned to leave. Emperor Jing shook his head. Of course, Emingzu had to be released, but he had to wait a few more days. When the heat of the matter died down, it would be much easier. If he brought it up now, there would probably be countless voices of opposition in the court. Your Majesty, in recent days, the public sentiment in Jingdo has become more and more serious. There are even women who have formed organizations. Although we have not seen them do anything, we cannot sit idly by. In the political hall, a supervising imperial censor was reporting the situation in Jingdo to Emperor Jing. Aren't we already preparing to issue a new law? Why is it like this? A few officials furrowed their brows and asked. The supervising imperial censor was depressed and wondered why such a situation had occurred. How would he know? He also felt that after the court issued the law, the hearts of the people in Jingdo would stabilize. Those women would certainly be grateful to the court and no longer be angry. Who would have thought that the matter was becoming more and more serious? Now it was no longer just a problem of women. No one knew who it was, but the streets and alleys of Jingdo were covered with small notes. There were only a few short sentences on them, such as women can hold up half the sky. Relying on a man can only be a princess. Relying on oneself can be an empress. The empress had appeared. Were they going to rebel? Of course, the empress was just a metaphor. This was not important. What was important was that Jingdo was becoming more and more chaotic. A certain man who often beat his wife was found on the street this morning. His face was bruised and swollen, and his original appearance could not be recognized. He could only tremble and continuously say, "Heroine, have mercy." A 7-foot man now subconsciously avoided women when he saw them. It was likely that he would never be a man again in this life. A certain imperial censor, who had impeached the princess, returned home after a busy day. From his mother to his daughter, no one gave him a good look. There was not even rice in the pot. With great difficulty, he found 2 cold steamed buns to appease his hunger. He went to bed and wanted to be intimate with his wife. However, he was kicked off the bed. His wife was the daughter of a famous family. Although he was the head of the family, his status was only slightly higher than that of the family's dog. He could only be angry when he was kicked. That kick was really painful. A certain imperial censor rubbed his waist and continued. As of this morning, nearly 1,000 women have signed a petition for Her Royal Highness. Her Royal Highness is sharing the country's worries. In a moment of desperation, she has lost her etiquette in the court. It is pardonable. May I be so bold as to ask your majesty to pardon the eldest princess? Censor Lin's words are reasonable. I ask your majesty to pardon the eldest princess. I second that. Without a unified statement in advance, many court officials came out one after another to plead for Her Royal Highness to be pardoned. If great scholar Han had been beheaded, then so be it. Who asked him to not watch his mouth? These few days, the women in the family would disappear from the house from time to time. They did not know what mysterious activities they were doing. Their wives treated them coldly, and their daughters simply ignored them. Later, they found out that they were preparing to organize a group to plead for Her Royal Highness to pardon the eldest princess. Pleading was a common thing, but since ancient times, how could there be a woman who did this? Even if they ignored this matter, the family was still in a mess these few days. If Her Royal Highness was not released, they would really not be able to live on. Chapter 525. Pardon the eldest princess? Emperor Jing looked at the officials below and said, although Emingzu is the eldest princess, she committed murder in the Golden Palace. If she is not severely punished, I'm afraid it will not appease the people. The censor who was elected as the representative by the censorate secretly felt bitter. His Majesty was using their previous words to slap their faces. But at this time, he could only brace himself and say, the officials saw what happened that day with their own eyes. It was the great scholar Han who was in the wrong first. As an official, how can we be disrespectful to Her Highness? Her Highness is wholeheartedly serving the country. It is understandable that she was impulsive. Moreover, His Majesty has already grounded the eldest princess. I think that if we severely punish the eldest princess because of this, I'm afraid it will chill the hearts of the officials who serve the country wholeheartedly. Censor Lin's words once again drew the agreement of countless officials. It was really that this matter was far beyond their expectations. If it was someone else who committed murder in the Golden Palace, they would have been beheaded long ago. But the eldest princess was the eldest princess after all. Even if great scholar Han was really killed, no one would think that the eldest princess would pay with her life, let alone a strand of her hair. At most, she would be stripped of her title. With His Majesty's love for the eldest princess, it would not take long for him to find another reason to restore it. But no matter what, their attitude had to be set. If even the Golden Palace could be so easily dealt with, what was the use of the law? However, who could have expected that the public opinion was almost one-sided? If it was only the people, it was fine. Even the daughters of the wealthy and officials had a strong reaction to this. They joined forces to petition His Majesty to pardon Her Highness the eldest princess. Some daughters of the prestigious families had even set up an organization called the Women's Union. This Women's Union was different from the Poetry Society and the like. Its purpose was to solve the difficulties of women. In recent days, they had vigorously promoted the matter of late marriage and late childbirth in the capital city. To some extent, it had saved a lot of effort for the court. Although Her Highness the eldest princess was still grounded in the palace, she was the first president that they had jointly elected. These days, she had been going around for the eldest princess's matter. Even the officials had a headache. Every single one of these women had a powerful background. The Wang clan and a few other large clans, families of generals, a few princesses, and even a few ministers of the imperial court had people from their families. This was a force that could not be easily shaken. Since all of you have said so, Emperor Jing looked thoughtful and said, Changde, go to the morning dew hall. You're out so soon? Li Yi looked at Her Royal Highness, who was standing in the courtyard in astonishment. It seemed that the officials in the court were even more impatient than he had imagined. Women's Union? Emingzi looked at him and asked, Is it your doing? What women's union? Li Yi looked back at Li Xian and asked, You did it? Li Xian shook his head. He had indeed done a lot of things these days, including encouraging the Wang clan and a few other large clans and families of generals to unite to put pressure on the imperial court. But this women's union really had nothing to do with him. It's a new organization established by some women from influential families in the capital. They said that they wanted to unite and do something for women. They elected me as the first president. I'm considering. When Emingzi hesitated, Li Yi waved his hand and said, What else is there to consider? You don't know what kind of position you have in the hearts of the women in the capital. No one is more suitable than you for this position. The president of the Women's Union was the patron saint of all the women in the Jing Kingdom. She had a halo above her head. If she did more practical things for women, half of the world would fall to her side with a wave of her arm. Of course, it was impossible for her to start a vigorous feminist movement now. The concept of male superiority and female inferiority had been deeply rooted and could not be easily changed. In fact, even those women themselves, under the inspiration of the unknown man with ulterior motives, could only have some vague ideas in their hearts and could not be grasped. The establishment of the Women's Union was such a result. They still did not know the direction. They only knew that by doing this, they might be able to slightly change something. They did not dare to think about it before, and had never thought about it. Now Her Royal Highness stood up and led them to take a big step forward. Maybe they could take a few more steps in the future. Really has nothing to do with you? Emingzi looked at Li Yi with a face full of doubt. I swear it's definitely not me. Li Yi raised 4 fingers and pointed to the sky. If this really has anything to do with me, let me. As he spoke, he looked at Her Royal Highness. After a long time, he put down his slightly sore arm, looked at Emingzi and asked, Why didn't you stop me? This was definitely not right. Logically speaking, when he was about to swear, Her Royal Highness should not have quickly covered his mouth and said with a touched face, Enough, I don't need you to swear, I believe you. Go ahead, I'm listening. Her Royal Highness crossed her arms and looked at him. Boring. Li Yi shook his head, stood up, and walked to the indoor playground at the side. Hey, Li Bingning. Can't you just sit there quietly? Why are you playing the slide? Come down. Emingzi looked away from Li Yi's back and looked at Li Xian. Li Xian spread out his hands and said, It's definitely not me, but in my opinion, there is no harm for you to be the president. At least, it will be more convenient for you to do things in the future. After thinking for a moment, Emingzi finally nodded. Sigh, Detective Zhao, how can we stop singing just like that? The tickets have already been sold. The customers will have complaints. Inside the brothel, Old Sun looked at a man dressed like an official with a troubled expression. Sigh, Old Sun, this is what the higher-ups want. We are just following orders. The official with the surname Zhao sighed and said, the imperial court is already looking for that Wu. Say, why don't you think about it, at this time? Can this kind of show still be performed? Old Sun's expression changed and said, Detective Zhao, we don't know either. It is not allowed by the imperial court. Moreover, we bought it from someone else. I know. In all of the brothels in the capital, only you have the most conscience. You never spread rumors. Last time, in the case of Deputy Mayor Ma, it was you guys who helped to clear his name. Even the censorate praised you guys. The tile house in the west of the city, which was the first to perform this kind of show, has been completely sealed. Lord Lu specially instructed me not to make things difficult for you guys. Detective Zhao waved his hand and said, Old Sun, don't worry, this matter is not your fault. If you want to blame someone, blame that Wu. I came to tell you that Romance of the Western Chamber, Peony Pavilion, and especially Peacock Flies Southeast, don't ever sing again. Got it. Old Sun nodded repeatedly. All right, I will bring my brothers to other places to take a look. Detective Zhao waved his hand and turned to walk out of the brothel. Everything was fine. Why aren't we allowed to sing anymore? Old Sun shook his head in pity. The tile house in the west of the city has been sealed. We can just buy it. Forget it. We will talk about this in the future. That Milan should start rehearsing. Chapter 526. In the short span of a day, the Peacock Flies Southeast, the Peony Pavilion, and the Romance of the Western Chamber had completely disappeared from all the brothels in the capital. Even the handwritten scripts on the market had been forcibly confiscated by the officials. The commoners were naturally puzzled by the fact that they weren't even allowed to sell their scripts. However, the imperial court had never given them an explanation, so they were already used to it. In any case, there were plenty of plays in the brothels, so they could just watch something else. Sigh, I've gone all over the capital, but I still haven't been able to buy it. I'm going to get scolded by the young miss when I get back. A young servant girl wearing a green dress with her hair combed into two buns sighed as she walked along the road. Sigh, young miss. Suddenly, a voice rang out from beside her. The young servant girl turned around and saw a sneaky man waving at her from a corner of the wall. That man was ugly and extremely wretched, thinking of what her mistress had said before, that in the capital, there were people who specialized in abducting and selling beautiful young girls like her. The young servant girl nervously retreated a few steps. Suddenly, someone grabbed her arm and forcefully pulled her into a small alley on the side. Save! Ugh! She only managed to shout one word before her mouth was covered. It's over. The young girl's eyes immediately filled with tears when she thought of something extremely terrifying. Young Miss Chiner, I'm afraid I won't be able to see you again. Lower your voice, lower your voice. The voice of a man behind her was a little anxious. Sensing that the man had let go of her, the young servant girl immediately took 2 steps back and looked at the man warily. A lewd smile appeared on the face of the wretched man. He unbuttoned his clothes and walked step by step towards the young girl in the corner of the wall. What do you want? The young girl's voice trembled, and her large eyes were filled with endless fear. Young miss, don't be afraid. The man smiled lewdly as he tore open his clothes. Both sides of his clothes were filled with pockets, and in the pockets were many thin books. The man revealed a mysterious smile and said, Young miss, do you want books? The Romance of the Western Chamber, the Peony Pavilion, and the Peacock Flies Southeast all have them. They're all uncut versions. The young girl's expression froze. A moment later, the man sent the young servant girl out with a smile and said fervently, Young miss, you can go ask around. My prices here are the lowest in the surrounding 18 streets. If you want to buy any other books, you can come find me here. If you want more than 10 books, I can even lower the price by 1 copper coin per book. That depends on how clear your copy is and how many mistakes there are. The little servant girl waved her hand and said, All right, if you still want to buy it, I will come here to find you. the girl carried the booklets like a thief and disappeared into the crowd in no time. I'm not allowed to sing anymore? Li took a sip of tea and asked. Old Sun, who was sitting to the side, shook his head and said, Yes, the government just sent someone yesterday to say that Peacock Flies Southeast, Romance of the Western Chamber, and Peony Pavilion are not allowed to sing. If you don't want me to sing, then I won't sing. Li waved his hand and didn't care at all. This incident was within his expectations. If it weren't for the incident with the princess, these 3 plays would at most be considered as skirting the boundaries in the current era. They were nothing in the brothel, and there were many other brothels that were even more ambitious than these. Unfortunately, the brothel just wanted to produce some new plays to attract customers, but they encountered such an incident. It was really unfortunate. Moreover, John Doe's goal should have already been achieved. Romance of the Western Chamber and the Peony Pavilion were also banned books in ancient times, but even Sister Dayu was obsessed with them. Didn't the young ladies of the big families and noble ladies also have a copy of it, hiding it under their pillows in their rooms, and secretly reading it when no one was around? Old Man Sun asked with uncertainty. Then do we still want Mulan? Yes, of course. Why not? Li looked at him and said, Who is Hua Mulan? She is loyal and filial, and joined the army on behalf of her father. She is a heroine. Didn't there have been plays about her in the past? We just want people to cherish the memory of heroes. If they can be inspired by their moral integrity, learn to be brave and take on heavy responsibilities, not be greedy for high position and generous salary, serve the motherland, be brave and good at war, be filial to your parents, be brave and strong. That will also be excellent. Challenging feudal ethics and pursuing freedom of love were not allowed. This was very normal. If they had known that John Doe had such intentions, the brothel would not have fallen into his trap no matter what. However, since they were not allowed to do negative things, they could at least do something positive, right? The story of Hua Mulan, the heroine, had inspired countless people since ancient times. Although the dynasties had changed, there were still many dynasties that officially defined her as a national hero, and her story was widely spread. Although Her Royal Highness was a woman, she cared about the country. She was of noble birth. In order to understand the feelings of the people, she was willing to leave the palace and become a small constable. When the country's reputation was about to be damaged, she stepped forward bravely and risked her life to fight a grandmaster. Now, she did not hesitate to be imprisoned in order to speak up for the women of the world and change the unhealthy atmosphere in society. What kind of spirit was this? This was the spirit of internationalism. This was humanitarianism. This was the spirit of patriotism. All the people of the Jing Kingdom, regardless of gender, had to learn from her spirit of selflessness. From this point, they could become people who greatly benefited the people. A person's ability varied, but as long as they had this spirit, they would be a noble person, a pure person, a moral person, a person who was free from vulgar interests, and a person who was beneficial to the people. Her Royal Highness was such a person. Wasn't this the current Hua Mulan? No, Her Royal Highness had even more noble sentiments than Hua Mulan. It was not enough to just be Hua Mulan. When he had time, he would flip through the history books to see if there were any other national heroines who were not inferior to men. Heroes should receive the glory that belonged to them, and should not exist in the dusty history books. You're right, sir. Old Sun looked enlightened. You're really thoughtful, sir. I'll go back and urge them to hurry up and rehearse. Also, I'm afraid that this kind of play will be more popular among the women. When that time comes, we should add a few more women's performances. Fong was arm wrestling with Princess Shanning's guards on the stone table in the courtyard. It was a 1v5. All 5 of them were red in the face, but he still looked relaxed. The arrogant Lolita was so angry that she kept complaining that her guards were useless. She stopped watching and ran to the side with Yong Ning to play on the swing. After watching Old Sun leave, Li stood in the courtyard and let out a long sigh of relief. After all, this was a feudal society. To be able to do this was already the best that could be achieved. The concept of men being superior to women had existed since ancient times. With the development of history, the status of women became lower and lower. However, it did not fall in a straight line. There would always be some ups and downs. During the Tang dynasty, the status of women had reached its peak in the past few hundred years. Divorce was common. Not many people would criticize a woman for not following the virtues of a woman if she rode a horse and hit a ball in public. It was even more so in the palace. There were countless love triangles and quartet relationships. Of course, the elegance of the women of the Tang dynasty was not something that the women of the Jing kingdom could envy. However, they were still the continuation of the Tang dynasty, so they could always inherit some of the style of their predecessors. This was especially reflected among the nobles. In recent years, the emperor had deliberately supported the poor students and weakened the influence of the rich families in the court. The poor students had a weak foundation and needed to find a backer. The rich families wanted to expand their influence, so the daughters of the rich families married into the lower class. This was the best choice for both sides. In the past few years, it was popular to the point that some married students did not dare to look at the list. Not to mention the poor students. Among the noble families, the probability of marriage was close to 90%. Who didn't have a powerful family and had not suffered much since childhood. How could they be bullied if they married into your family? This led to many high-spirited officials in the court, but when they returned home, they immediately shrunk their necks and behaved themselves. According to the analysis of the intelligence agencies, some officials in the Jing kingdom were so strict with their wives that it was shocking. Although they might not be influenced by women in some important decisions, in the upper class of the capital, women still had a lot of power. Li didn't expect them to be able to completely subvert the tradition and start a revolution, to lead the women of the Jing kingdom to become the masters, to suppress the men under their bodies. This was impossible. Of course, it was still possible under special circumstances. What's more, the purpose of the nameless man, was not to start a vigorous women's rights movement from the beginning. The seed had been planted. Who knew what would happen in the end? Maybe it would be strangled as soon as it sprouted. Maybe it would grow into a towering tree. But no matter what, there would be some changes. He would leave the rest to Her Royal Highness, to him. This matter had completely come to an end. Li shook his head and stopped thinking about it. At a certain moment, he inadvertently glanced over, and his expression changed. Li Bingning, come down. Who allowed you to climb the tree? Li walked into the yard and pointed at the proud Lolita, who was sitting on the tree and making faces at him. He said angrily, "If you don't listen to me, I won't take you out to play anymore." The proud Lolita stuck out her tongue at him and waved a bird egg in her hand. She said proudly, "Look, I dug it out. I'm good, right?" The proud Lolita had dared to climb up the tree to dig out a bird's nest. She had already climbed up the tree. The next step was probably going to be the sky. Mississippi Lou had to hide the kite that she brought from the Crown Prince's residence. "Will you climb the tree again next time?" When Li asked her with a straight face, the proud Lolita hid behind Rui. He could not even see her face. "I'll go and cook," Rui said with a smile. There were cooks in the mansion, but Rui still cooked most of the time. "Sister Rui, I'll go help you." The proud Lolita slipped away even faster. She stole a glance at Li and rushed into the kitchen before Rui. Li rubbed his eyebrows helplessly. He turned around and looked at the guards who were arm wrestling with Fong. He said angrily, "What are you all doing? Don't you want your heads anymore? And you, don't think that I won't scold you just because you're old. Why did His Majesty send you all here? What do you mean by standing at the door all day and dozing off?" They didn't even know what their duties were. What kind of security team was sent by the old emperor? The guards immediately stood up. The eyes of the gray-robed old man at the door twitched. It took him a lot of effort to calm down the raging true energy in his heart. Your wife is watching from the side. How could anything happen to Her Highness? Besides, Princess Shaning has decided to do something. Do you dare to stop her? Lu Dayo, the magistrate of the capital, was very happy today. He was singled out and praised by His Majesty in front of all the civil and military officials in the imperial court. He even received a lot of rewards. Looking at the envious eyes of the big shots who were usually more powerful than him, he felt as if he had drunk a bowl of iced sour plum soup on a hot day. He thought that he would only be able to guard the small piece of land in Anchi County for the rest of his life. He would be able to retire peacefully when he was old. When he was 60, he would have a big house with dozens of acres of land for retirement. He would have filial children and grandchildren. He would never run out of money. He could even have fun with his beautiful concubine every noon. These were not too much to ask for, were they? But he never thought that when he was middle-aged, he would seem to be bewitched. His good luck was so good that even he was afraid. First, his Anchi County had a good reputation and was rated as an advanced and civilized county in the country. He was also inexplicably promoted from Qing and prefecture to the capital and to the center of power. Although he was only a small county magistrate, he was able to sit in the position of the magistrate of the capital at his age. It was hard to say what position he would be promoted to in the future. Initially, he thought that as long as he did his job conscientiously, he would be able to catch His Majesty's eye as he was familiar with the way things were done in Anchi County. In any case, he was familiar with the way things were done in Anchi County. But who would have thought that after such a short time, before he had even warmed his seat, he would be summoned by His Majesty and come to the court for a one-day tour? When he returned to the county government, His Majesty's imperial edict and rewards had arrived. Because he was an outsider, he would be ostracized by the county magistrate and others from time to time. When he received the imperial edict just now, he saw that the county magistrate's face was pale with fear. Naturally, he felt proud in his heart. When he came out of the imperial palace just now, Lord Dong also praised him and said many words of encouragement. When Lord Dong was still the magistrate of Qing and prefecture, he was Anchi County magistrate. Now that he was working under Lord Dong, he could be considered to have a backer. As the son-in-law of Prime Minister Shun, and a person highly valued by His Majesty, Lord Dong's official career would certainly not be limited to a mere capital magistrate. This was not the only happy event recently. That good-for-nothing boy of his had worked hard and actually passed the entrance examination of the School of Mathematics. His father would no longer have to worry about his future. Congratulations, Lord. Congratulations. County Magistrate Liu sat in the hall and took a sip of tea. Then, a person walked in from outside the door and came forward to congratulate him with a happy face. County Magistrate Liu waved his hand. Although this Detective Zhao was far inferior to Liu Yidong, he was exquisite and could be considered a talent. He was one of the few confidants he had. County Magistrate Liu asked, "How is it going?" Detective Zhao immediately cupped his hands and said, "Don't worry, Lord. I have already gone to all the brothels in the capital. There are no more brothels performing those plays. The handwritten copies sold on the streets have all been brought back to be destroyed." County Magistrate Liu took another sip of tea and said, "The court has been paying close attention to this matter these days. You have to keep an eye on it. If there are any discoveries, do not let it go." "Yes, I understand." Detective Zhao revealed a hesitant expression and said, "Lord, although we have done a good job on the surface, there are still some people secretly peddling copies. They cannot be completely banned. Their movements are secretive, and it is impossible to completely ban them. It is enough to do a good job on the surface," County Magistrate Liu said as he stood up. That nameless person with ulterior motives had used these sensitive dramas to incite the women of the capital, which was why the capital had been in chaos a few days ago. Now that Her Highness had been released from house arrest, even if those dramas were still being circulated in a small circle, they wouldn't be able to cause any more waves. County Magistrate Liu curled his lips as he walked out of the door. Those plays were a bunch of nonsense. They said that women should pursue free love, which violated the etiquette and the law. Fortunately, his daughter had been at home all the time and was not poisoned by those dirty thoughts. However, he still had to listen to the Princess Royal Highness. Yin was only 14 years old this year. He had originally planned to arrange a marriage for her this year, but now it seemed that it would be better to postpone it for another 2 years. County Magistrate Lu walked to the door of his daughter's room and saw that it was unlocked. He wanted to knock on the door and enter, but he saw his daughter leaning over the table and not moving for a long time. Yin, what are you doing? He walked in and asked with some doubt. Father, why are you here? Hearing the voice, the girl's expression changed and she hurriedly closed the book in her hand. County Magistrate Lu glanced at the book and saw the 3 big words, Romance of the Western Wing, on the cover. Chapter 527. It's over. Miss has been discovered. The girl named Xiaoqin put her ear to the corner of the window and looked frightened. I'm so angry. After a while, County Magistrate Lu came out of his daughter's room angrily and locked the door. Seeing the little maid standing by the window, he asked, Xiaoqin, come here. The little maid trembled and came over. County Magistrate Lu threw the book Romance of the Western Wing on the ground and asked angrily, Tell me, how did Miss get this book? Master, I. Seeing County Magistrate Lu's angry look, the little maid trembled and couldn't say a word. Did young master give it to her? County Magistrate Lu suddenly frowned. This guy doesn't learn good things all day and only teaches his sister bad things. How dare he give her such a shameless book? I'll skin him alive. The little maid looked puzzled. Young master? It's really that brat. County Magistrate Lu's face darkened and he said, Keep a close eye on Miss and don't allow her to step out of the door. Brat, he's getting bolder and bolder. Oh. The little maid stood there in a daze with a silly expression. Dad, it's really not me. The young man leaned against the window and shouted, I've been studying mathematics at home these days. Dad, let me out. Dad, I admit that I went to Jade Courtyard 2 days ago. But what happened to my sister has nothing to do with me. As County Magistrate Lu walked out of a moon-shaped door, the young man's voice gradually disappeared. All of them have grown up. County Magistrate Lu's face was livid. His daughter watched that kind of indecent drama, and his son went to a brothel. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed that he, as a father, was not strict with his children. He had been busy with official affairs these days, and indeed neglected to discipline them. Hey, where did Lord Lu go? Detective Zhao looked around the county government office with a puzzled expression, until he saw a figure coming from the arched door. He hurried to greet him and said, Lord, what's the matter? Say it. County Magistrate Lu had a bellyful of anger and had nowhere to vent it, so he said coldly, Detective Zhao was startled. He knew that something was wrong with Lord Lu. If he had known earlier, he would have kept a low profile for a while. But now, he had no choice but to bite the bullet. He carefully said, Sir, in the city, the brothel in the city has a new show today. It's called Mulan. Hua Mulan? Lord Lu raised his eyebrows and said, Why is it a woman again? What do they want? Didn't I say that we are not allowed to sing these kinds of nonsense? Now that he heard things related to women, he was annoyed, so he naturally spoke with some anger. In that case, I'll tell them that they're not allowed to sing this song either. Detective Zhao probed. County Magistrate Lu said coldly, You're not allowed to sing. If anyone sings in a brothel again, bring him back. Then he added, if it's old son, try to persuade him. All right, I'll go now. Detective Zhao nodded. I'll take my leave. He turned his head and walked out mumbling. Everyone says that Her Royal Highness is the reincarnation of Hua Mulan. Women are not inferior to men. Who is Hua Mulan? How can she be compared to Her Royal Highness? Her Royal Highness? County Magistrate Lu's expression changed, and he immediately said, Come back. Sir, is there anything else? Detective Zhao quickly turned his head. County Magistrate Lu looked at him and asked, Is it just Hua Mulan? Is there anything else? Detective Zhao asked doubtfully, Sir, what do you mean? County Magistrate Lu looked at him and asked, Is there anything about eloping, drowning in the river, adultery, freedom of marriage, or anything like that? Detective Zhao thought about it and said, I don't think so. That Hua Mulan is a heroine. She's loyal and filial. She's brave and smart. The people are saying that Her Royal Highness is. There's no elopement. Why are you reporting that she drowned in the river? County Magistrate Lu pointed at his nose and said, "Do you have nothing to do all day? Hua Mulan is a national hero. She's not inferior to men. Why do you care about her singing and praising her? Do you think that I'm not busy enough?" Detective Zhao stood rooted to the ground. His breathing was rapid, and his chest was heaving up and down. After a long time, he gradually calmed down. He looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, "Sir, I have something to say. I don't know if I should say it." "Say it." County Magistrate Lu was affected by what had just happened. His tone was slightly gentler. I forgot." Detective Zhao sighed. In the end, he didn't have the courage to say those 3 words to Lord Lu. He said, "I'll take my leave." County Magistrate Lu waved his hand at him and stroked the short beard on his chin. Hua Mulan, Princess Royal. Could this be the doing of the Princess Royal or Her Majesty? The Princess Royal's Women's Union had the support of Her Majesty, and Her Majesty the Queen. This move was probably to further establish the Princess Royal's prestige in the hearts of the people. If he messed it up, that was close. County Magistrate Lu patted his chest and was secretly shocked. Recently, the Tsundra Loli had been pestering Rui for some reason. She stopped swinging on the swing and stopped playing on the slide. Instead, she circled around Rui all day. Her behavior was extremely abnormal. It was not easy to get rid of her. Only then did he have time to spend alone with Rui before he could walk over and talk to her. Mississippi Lu stood at the door and coughed softly. She looked at Li Yi and said, "Can you go out for a while? I have something to say to my sister." One Tsundra Loli had just left, and now another one was here to cause trouble. Li Yi glanced at her and said with some dissatisfaction, "What is it that you can't say directly?" Leaning against the door, Mississippi Lu crossed her arms and stared at him. After a while, Li Yi and Tsundra Loli squatted in the yard. There was a simple chessboard drawn on the ground. "Let's make it clear in advance. This time, your elephant can't fly, and the mouse can't drill into the ground." Tsundra Loli looked at him and said warily. A disdainful expression appeared on Li Yi's face. Was it necessary for him to use Dumbo and the gopher to play chess with an 11-year-old girl? Through the messages between the brothels, the news of the upcoming hero assembly should have almost spread throughout the martial arts world. However, there is only 1 month before the assembly begins. It's still a little tense. Some people might not be able to make it in time. Mississippi Lu sat by the bed and said to Rui while looking at her. Rui thought for a while and said, "Then let's postpone it for another half a month. We have to wait until most people arrive." Mississippi Lu said hesitantly, "In this way, there will be a lot more expenses. If the expenses are not enough, we can withdraw money from home." Rui thought for a while and said, "The qualification for the leader of the martial arts world is limited to the heaven list. It should be able to save a lot of time and expenses." "Okay," Mississippi Lu answered straightforwardly. There were countless masters in the martial arts world. No one would have thought that the hero assembly that swept through the martial arts world like a storm these days, the biggest event in the martial arts world in the past few decades, was decided in this way. The qualification for the leader of the martial arts world is limited to the heaven list. It was this short sentence that caused the fight for the heaven list to reach its climax in the near future. The reason why this decision was made was that it could save time and expenses. "Sister, are you really not planning to?" Mississippi Lu raised her head. She only managed to finish her sentence when Rui shook her head and said, "You know, I can't do these things." Mississippi Lu did not speak again. The decisions regarding the hero assembly had always been made by her sister. No matter how one looked at it, she was the most suitable person to be the leader. However, she did not have any thoughts about this position that countless people were fighting for. She looked outside the door and shook her head. The two of them were becoming more and more alike. "I won." The proud Loli stood up with a proud face. "If you don't act shamelessly, you won't be able to win against me." Li frowned and thought for a while. He raised his head and looked at her. He asked, "Have you heard of Tigger? The kind that can jump out of the enemy's encirclement with its tail?" Chapter 528. Have you heard of Tigger? The proud girl paused and asked Yongning, who was standing beside Li. Yes. Yongning nodded. Winnie the Pooh Tiggery air. I've heard of them. I'm done. You two teamed up to trick me. The proud girl walked angrily into the room. Royal sister, I didn't. I've really heard of them. If you don't believe me, I'll draw them for you. Yongning glanced at Li and followed. It was very pitiful for her royal sister to not even know about Pretty Goat. Now, she had not even heard of Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. To her, this was unimaginable. Li shook his head. She was done playing so soon. He still had a howling celestial dog that could eat an elephant that he had not sent out. Jingdo was under the feet of the emperor. Any strange movement was under the court's watch and would never cause too much trouble. The chaos in Jingdo caused by the eldest princess's incident did not last for long. Under the heavy pressure of the court, it gradually calmed in the following days. In the Jingdo brothels, peacock flies to the southeast was no longer heard of. On the market, it was also difficult to buy Romance of the Western Chamber and the Peony Pavilion, which had already been listed as banned. However, in a woman's boudoir that was difficult for outsiders to enter, there were a few thin books under her pillow and mattress. She would only read them in the quiet of the night. Sometimes her face would flush, and sometimes she would cry. There were also ghost-like figures wandering around the streets and alleys. Their eyes darted everywhere, fearfully avoiding the officials. If they saw a young woman poking her head out on the street, they would carefully approach, pull open a slit in their clothes, and say in a low voice, "Girl, do you want the excellent edition of Romance of the Western Chamber, the Peony Pavilion? 10 copper coins a copy, honest with all ages." The Women's Union, which had made a lot of noise, did not make any big moves after His Majesty lifted the eldest princess's confinement. They only made a lot of efforts to help the court carry out the new policy of women's marriage. Not only did they get a lot of praise in the court, but their influence among women was also growing day by day. The imperial court still did not give up on the investigation of John Doe. This kind of person who had ulterior motives and incited public opinion was really hateful. If they did not control him, he would probably cause more trouble in the future. Of course, none of this had anything to do with Li. These days he was quite idle. Her Highness the eldest princess was busy with other things. Naturally, the frequency of the Tsundra Lolita leaving the palace could not be too frequent. Although this caused his super invincible celestial dog to not have a place to use it, every few days, he would go shopping with Rui, listen to plays, and play with Yongning and Xiaohuan. His days were rather leisurely. In the blink of an eye, it had been more than a month since Yongning left the palace. "Whose child is that?" Zheng Zimo asked Li, looking at the little girl playing with Xiao Chui and Yu Zhu. "A relative." Li could only answer this way. Even the old mistress almost couldn't control herself when she found out about Yongning's identity for the first time. The fewer people who knew about this, the better. Moreover, for her, she preferred the life of an ordinary person at the moment. These days he would occasionally bring Yongning here. After all, the brothel was getting bigger and bigger. In addition to the capital, it had spread to countless states and counties. The speed of its expansion was astonishing. As the mastermind behind the scenes, as the behind-the-scenes shopkeeper, he naturally couldn't ignore everything. In fact, the interior of the brothel had been divided into various departments. Old Sun was only responsible for singing, acting and the like. Wan Ruoqing mainly focused on the business under the brothel. Zheng Zimo, as the chief designer and general manager of the new lingerie, decided what the women who walked in front of the trend wore, and how they wore it. In the details, Li could no longer tell them what to do. As long as he could ensure that there were no mistakes in the general direction, he could let them do whatever they wanted. Of course, today's brothel naturally had more than what was on the surface. The complicated intelligence organization, the Lu Second Young Ladies Lu Alliance, and the Chivalry Ranking Board, which had a strong appeal, were all part of this huge organization. By then, that small shack had become so big that no one could ignore it. Yongning walked over from afar and fed a piece of osmanthus cake to Li. She said, "Brother, this osmanthus cake is so delicious. When we go back, Let's bring some for Sister Rui, Sister Xiao Huan, and Sister Duanwu. The old man standing behind her was already used to this. He wasn't surprised at how the princess called Li Yi. Little sister, what's your name? Zheng Zimo squatted down and picked Yongning up. She tapped on her nose and asked, My name is Li Sini. Yongning wasn't shy at all. She was no longer the silly princess who only stared at the sky. She looked back at Li Yi and said, Brother, I've seen this sister on TV before. Court examination? Zheng Zimo was confused. Li Yi didn't explain to Zheng Zimo. Yongning was a child after all. Although he had warned her many times to be careful with what she said in the future, and not to tell others what she knew before. A 5-year-old girl would sometimes say whatever came to her mind. Even at home, there would often be such awkward scenes. Rui and Xiao Huan were already used to this. TV means, anyway, they are praising you for being beautiful. Li Yi thought for a long time, but couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation. He looked at her and said, Children speak without fear. Don't take it to heart. Children's ability to distinguish was not very good. Perhaps they thought she was a character in a costume drama on TV. Actually, after hearing what she said, Li Yi also felt that she was somewhat similar to a famous actress in costume dramas. Children speak without fear? Zheng Zimo was dazed for a moment before she understood what he meant. She gritted her teeth and looked at Li Yi coldly. Let's go. I'll take you out to play. Zheng Zimo glared at him and walked out with Yongning in her arms. The gray-robed elder flashed and was about to make a move when Li Yi tugged at his clothes and said, It's fine. Outside, Zheng Zimo was already playing on the swing with Yongning. Li Yi held his chin with one hand. He still didn't see the underwear show he wanted to see, but he saw many pictures of the latest styles. Miss Zheng was Miss Zheng after all. She bought all the underwear of the women in the brothels in the capital. Although it was far from replacing the underwear, she had actually started the underwear business at the same time. The underwear shop had now become famous in the capital. Until now, although the women in the brothel were the most buying, there were already some bold women who had begun to test the market, especially in the shop with slogans such as, It's good to be a woman. Slogans such as Even the birds and geese sink, and the moon and flowers blush in shame, all because I'm standing up for you. And what's holding up isn't yourself, it's his heart, were sent out and circulated among the women. When he took out these advertising slogans, because he looked at Miss Zheng a few more times, she threw a few pillows at him. Of course, even if this kind of underwear was still a bit conservative, very few women would wear it. The pleasure of the couple in the bedroom was one thing, but most of them would secretly try it on at home. After all, no one wanted to lose some of the characteristics of a woman after a few years. No matter what, this was for the sake of women. Li Yi drank a cup of tea to moisten his throat. Just as he was thinking about whether to use the Princess Royal's power to help with the publicity, he heard singing coming from outside. Zheng Zimo had been trained as a pillar since she was a child. She was proficient in the 4 arts and naturally, her singing was also good. Li Yi had heard her sing a few times. Her foundation was very good. However, which prostitute could sing Don't look at me just a sheep? Don't look at me just a sheep. The green grass becomes more fragrant because of me. The sky becomes bluer because of me. The white clouds become softer because of me. The voice was crisp and beautiful, extremely pleasant to the ear. Li Yi didn't have time to swallow a mouthful of tea and sprayed it all out. Chapter 529. She's an 18 or 19-year-old girl. Isn't it childish for her to sing such a song? Li Yi shook his head. When he walked into the yard, he heard Zheng Zimo's maids, Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu whispering. What happened to that chin from last time? Xiao Zhu glanced in the direction of the swing. Seeing that Zheng Zimo wasn't paying attention, she asked quietly. Xiao Chui pouted and said, What else? He came several times, but Miss didn't see him. I heard that Chin's family is quite well off. His family is an official. So what if he's an official? We even know someone with a title. Xiao Chui didn't care at all and said, That Chin isn't good looking. Miss doesn't want to be his concubine. Being an official isn't good. Miss will be wronged if she goes there. If the young miss went over, she would naturally have to follow. That young Master Chen was actually quite good-looking. He was a fair-skinned young man. But compared to young Master Li, he was still inferior. Even if it wasn't for the young mistress, for her own sake, she would definitely choose someone she liked more. However, Miss and Li didn't seem to have that intention. This wouldn't do. How about waiting until the next time Miss took a bath or changed clothes, and then let Li in? This could be considered. It would be best if the rice could be cooked. Li walked over and asked curiously, "What Chun?" Xiao Chui looked back at Li Yi and said, "He's an admirer of Miss, and wants to take Miss as a concubine. He's been here many times." After saying that, he stared at the expression on Li Yi's face. Concubine? Li Yi's expression changed. This wouldn't do. If Goddess Luo Shui ran away with someone else, where would he find such a good chief designer, chief artist, chief brothel manager? Wouldn't everything be a mess? Seeing the expression on his face, Xiao Chui finally relaxed. "What are you talking about?" Zheng Zimo walked over with Yong Ning in her arms. "I'm talking about Chun," Xiao Zhu said immediately. Zheng Zimo panicked for some reason. She looked at Li Yi and shook her head. "Why are you talking about him? He has nothing to do with us." "Exactly." Li Yi nodded and said in complete agreement. "A woman is 18 years old. Even the imperial court has said that it is most appropriate for a woman to talk about marriage after the age of 20. By the way, what is the background of that Chen?" Xiao Chui thought for a moment and said, "In Chen's home, it seems like there is some kind of minister counselor. What kind of wolf is a squire wolf? Does it bite people?" Xiao Zhu asked suspiciously. "Minister counselor?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "How can a mere minister counselor be worthy of your miss? The son of the minister counselor is even more unworthy. The next time he comes, tell him to wait until he dismisses the minister of rights and takes the seat himself before we discuss this matter." Xiao Chui nodded vigorously. Zheng Zimo looked at him. Although his words were pleasant to hear, why did she still have the urge to slap him? Zheng Zimo glared at him and said, "Bah! The Minister of Rights is already a third-rank official. How can you say something like this?" Li Yi sighed and said, "Self-improvement is the most important thing for a woman. If you look down on yourself, who will look up to you? So what if he's the Minister of Rights? So what if he's a third-rank official? You are the famous Luo Shui goddess of the Jing Kingdom. Just say the word, and the line of suitors will stretch from here to outside the city. How can you not have this little bit of confidence?" Zheng Zimo. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't worry after today. I will arrange for a few more people to guard this place. If that Chen guy dares to disturb again, break his legs." "I haven't thought about marrying yet." Zheng Zimo glanced at him and said. Li Yi nodded and said, "That's right. As citizens of the Jing Kingdom, we must respond to the call of the country. Don't be in a hurry to marry." They came in a particularly relaxed mood, but they were a bit annoyed when they left. This bastard surnamed Chen. Why did he come to make trouble at this critical time? Miss Zheng was only 18, 2 years away from turning 20. She couldn't even get a marriage certificate, let alone ask for a marriage. Besides, the Ministry of Rights was surnamed Chen. Wasn't this clearly related to Duke Chen's mansion? The Ministry of Rights was basically the territory of the Chen family, so this minister counselor should be the same. He was probably a branch or relative of the Chen family, related to Duke Chen's mansion. There weren't many good people among them. Could he push Miss Zheng into the fire pit? Obviously not. He was willing to go through fire and water for a friend, even if he had to offend the Chen family for this. Although it seemed that he had already offended the Chen family a long time ago. Li Yi sighed. If Miss Zheng wanted to leave, he would really be reluctant. Although the two of them hadn't gotten along since the first time they met, they had gone through so many things together, not just because of her importance in the brothel and other places. He was just joking just now. With her character, if she really wanted to do something, probably no one could stop her. Ever since she resolutely left the Jadeite courtyard, when she was the most popular, even though she became famous because of the goddess of Luo River, and her value skyrocketed 100 times, or even 1,000 times, she still didn't regret her decision. She lived a hard life with Xiao Chui. From this, it could be seen what kind of opinions she had. Of course, if she really chose to leave, Li Yi wouldn't stop her. Of course, he still had to stop her. He had to persuade her with love, reason, and profit. No matter what, he had to make her stay. No matter how selfish he was, he couldn't let her stay in the brothel for the rest of her life. That day would come eventually. Li Yi had a headache. Was there a way to completely solve this problem? Brother, I liked that sister Zeng just now. On the road, Yongning suddenly turned her head and said while holding his hand. Li Yi squatted down and picked her up, letting her sit on his shoulder, and said, "Why does Cindy like her?" "She sings for Cindy," Yongning said while swinging her legs. Li Yi shook his head. Yongning's affection for Zeng Zimo wasn't because she was willing to sing that kind of childish song for her. In her subconscious mind, she probably also regarded Zeng Zimo as someone familiar in her previous life. Even if she had only seen Zeng Zimo on TV, it was already precious to her. "Brother, do you like Sister Zeng?" Yongning grabbed Li Yi's neck and asked. "Do you like her?" "I like her." Li Yi sighed and said helplessly, his neck was about to break. "Yeah, I knew it." The little girl was obviously happy. "Brother, I want to hear you sing." She became more talkative when she was alone with Li Yi. "Sure, what song do you want to listen to?" "Two Tigers." "Can you change to another song?" "Change what?" "How about Don't Look at Me, I'm Just a Sheep?" "I've heard it just now." Okay. Li Yi could only shake his head helplessly again. A moment later a voice came. Two tigers, running fast, one without ears, one without tail. How strange. How strange. A few steps behind him, several palace guards tightly pursed their lips, but they didn't dare to laugh. Their bodies were slightly trembling, and their faces were already a little blue. Even the faces of the two gray-robed old men twitched when they raised their heads to look ahead. Hearing a strange movement behind him, Li Yi turned around and saw their expressions. He said coldly, "If anyone dares to laugh today, I'll push the merry-go-round for the whole day tomorrow." This was a life-threatening task. When the guards heard this, their expressions immediately turned serious and no longer showed the slightest hint of surprise. Li Yi turned around with satisfaction and continued to sing. Two tigers. Puff. Haha. I really can't help it. All the guards clutched their stomachs and staggered. Li Yi's expression was calm, and he didn't look back. Fang had been working hard these days, and it was time to take a few days off to relax. Chapter 530. Don't underestimate me just because I'm a sheep. The intelligence of a sheep is unimaginable. Xiao Huan hummed the song she had just learned to prepare for tomorrow's Mid-Autumn Festival. Ever since she could remember, she had always spent the Mid-Autumn Festival in the stockade village. First, she spent it with the master and the young mistress. Then it was only the young mistress and the young mistress. Then she had the young master. From then on, the Mid-Autumn Festival was different from before. Everything was good in the capital city, except that the moon was not as round as in Qing'an Prefecture. She still remembered that the young master told them the story of Chang Yi flying to the moon last Mid-Autumn Festival. Of course, there were even more incredible things about the moon. However, it was fine that the moon was not round, but the key was that the son-in-law seemed to be very happy. In Xiao Huan's memory, the son-in-law was not that happy during the Mid-Autumn Festival, or the 15th of every month. So every few days, she would feel a little worried. She did not know why there was such a change now, but change was always good. Ever since that little princess came to the house, the son-in-law had changed a little. Sometimes, she would have a sour feeling in her heart. Later on, she thought that she would soon return to the palace and live alone in a very big room. It must be very lonely. She did not know if she would be afraid to sleep at night. In any case, when she was that young, she did not dare to sleep alone. Thinking of this, she felt some sympathy in her heart, and the trace of jealousy in her heart also dissipated. Li Yi walked out of the room. He had just coaxed Yongning to sleep. Tomorrow was the Mid-Autumn Festival. Although he wanted to keep her, the old emperor would definitely not allow it. It had only been less than a month and a half, and the old emperor had called her back to the palace for 3 days. Rounding it up, It was 10 days. He had to postpone it for 10 days next month. Otherwise, he would suffer a great loss. Speaking of which, since coming to the capital, there had been a lot of messy things. It was only recently that he had completely relaxed. He really hoped that the days would continue like this. What King of Shu, what Chen family, what young Duke Qin, what Dianxia Academy. He didn't have to care about those messy things anymore. Yong Ning had just fallen asleep. Xiao Huan was busy in the kitchen, and Mississippi Lu rarely stayed out of the house. She was wiping her precious Chiushui in the yard. In the room beside her, the proud Lolita looked excited. She was talking with Rui. What a harmonious and warm scene. Sister Rui, can you let me marry Sir in the future? As soon as Li Yi stepped into the room, he heard the Tsundra Lolita pulling Rui's hand and saying this. The warm and harmonious scene was instantly shattered. Rui was stunned for a moment, then she chuckled. She really couldn't answer this little girl's joke. I'm not joking. The Tsundra Lolita was a little anxious and said, even if I really marry Sir in the future, Sister Rui is still a sister. I will be very obedient, just like now. I will always be younger than Sister Rui. Seeing that Rui was still unmoved, the Tsundra Lolita gritted her teeth and said, Two younger is fine too. At most, 1 younger than Sister Zeng that Sir secretly went to see. No younger than that. Sister Zeng? Rui let out a soft cry of surprise. She looked over the Tsundra Lolita. Sister Zeng. Mississippi Lu's Chiushui had already been wiped. She crossed her arms and carried her long sword in front of her chest. She stared straight at Li Yi. Li looked in front of him, and then looked behind him. He had a feeling that the world was big, and there was nowhere to escape. Husband, if you really like that goddess Luo Shui, then please bring her back. When there were only the two of them in the room, Rui looked at Li Yi and said, Husband, you don't need to worry about me. I'm not a jealous woman. Among the noble officials in the capital, which one of them is like you? I'm afraid that after a long time, there will be gossip. Li Yi raised his eyebrows. Who would dare to gossip? Moreover, I've been married to you for so long, but I haven't had a child for you or for the Li family. Rui's expression was a little gloomy, but her expression was very serious. That Miss Zeng can be considered talented and beautiful. She also has a good relationship with you. If she can enter the residence, I will feel better. Wife, don't joke. Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile. What do you mean by there will be a child? This kind of thing can't be rushed. Since the last time, she couldn't figure out Rui's routine. She and Rui were biological sisters. Perhaps their personalities were similar? According to Rui's personality, if he nodded slightly, the autumn water would be intimately touching his neck. He looked at Rui again and looked around. He asked suspiciously, Tell me, where is the sword hidden? After a while, Li Yi came out of the room. Looking at the tightly shut door, he gritted his teeth and said, Li Bingning, come out. Inside the room, Ru Yi's hand subconsciously caressed her abdomen, and she sighed softly. After you leave the palace this time, don't cause any more trouble. Spend more time with those officials. For the rest of the time, stay in the residence. Don't interact with those shady people. In a luxurious carriage at the gate of the palace, a woman dressed in palace attire said to a young man, Sienna understands. The young man's face was slightly pale. He lowered his head and said yes. He got out of the carriage and got into another carriage. Back to the King of Shu's mansion, he said in a low voice. The carriage slowly started and gradually disappeared into the street. The capital is still the same. The King of Shu murmured as the carriage moved forward with difficulty on the crowded street. He held a thick book in one hand and lifted the curtain with the other. At the same time, in the Qin mansion, another young man slowly walked out of the room while holding his chest. He took a few deep breaths of air, and a strange smile appeared on his face. The taste of freedom, it's been a long time. Greetings, little Duke. A timid voice sounded out from the side. Qin Yu turned to look at the unfamiliar maidservant, an expression of interest on his face. However, when he saw the long scar on the side of her face, he frowned and asked, Why haven't I seen you before? I only entered the mansion half a month ago. The servant girl said carefully. Yu didn't ask anymore, and just waved his hand in annoyance. I'll take my leave. The servant girl breathed a sigh of relief and left in a hurry. Although she had just entered the mansion, she had heard many rumors about the little duke. There were many servant girls in the mansion who had been violated by him. Naturally, she was afraid of him. Xiaomei, why are you in such a hurry? A rough voice of a man came from the side. The servant girl called Xiaomei stopped in her tracks and said, Brother Wu, it's nothing. Yes, this is the backyard. Walk slowly and don't bump into anyone. The man nodded and said, Brother Wu, I understand. The servant girl nodded. Brother Wu was a favorite of Fifth Lord, and was a very good person. When a few servants bullied her last time, he had stood up for her, and had always taken good care of her. All right, you can go. I still have something to do. The man waved his hand, turned around and left. The servant girl named Xiaomei stood there in a daze for a while. She sighed, and a complicated expression appeared on her face. Only when a voice calling for her came from the front, did she respond and quickly run over. Chapter 531. Before the Mid-Autumn Festival, Yongning and the Tsundra Lolita were taken into the palace. Today was the second day after the Mid-Autumn Festival, and Yongning should be sent back in 2 days. Since the beginning of autumn, the weather has gradually become cooler. The unbearable summer heat has gradually faded away. In the capital, the smoothie shops and ice-making workshops have gradually closed, but the sales of ruis are as hot as ever. According to the experience of last year, this kind of popularity will continue for at least 3 months, and will gradually decline after the first snow falls. Li Yi was lying on the rocking chair in the courtyard with his eyes closed. Xiao Huan stood behind him, and a pair of skillful hands pressed on his head skillfully. Knowing that her son-in-law was thinking about something, this time, she didn't chatter in Li Yi's ear, which was rare. Li Yi was indeed thinking about something, and it was a very troublesome thing. Rui's mood has been a little depressed in recent days. He thought it was a normal reaction during a special period, and tried all kinds of methods but failed to change it. It was not until 2 days ago that he found the crux of the matter. It has been a few months since the two of them consummated their marriage. Under normal circumstances, there should be no movement in her stomach. This is what she cares about. This is also what Li Yi is worried about. Could it be that in the process of transmigration, some unknown changes occurred in some places, leading to the current situation? He even went to the Imperial Physician's Bureau to find Lu Jimin. Although old Lu's diagnosis was that there was no problem, it did not make him feel at ease. After all, if there was really something wrong because of the different body and soul, it was not something that could be seen just by feeling the pulse. Of course, the problem may also lie with Rui. After all, this matter seems to have nothing to do with the level of martial arts. But considering the pressure in her heart, Li did not say anything or do anything, and tried to avoid this topic these 2 days. Since ancient times, people would blame this kind of thing on women. Even they themselves thought so. No wonder Rui wanted him to marry Miss Zeng. This has probably become a knot in her heart that can't be untied. Forget it, stop rubbing. The more he thought about it, the more annoyed he became. Li Yi patted Xiao Huan's hand and said, "Oh." The young maidservant behind her responded in a low voice. She had a worried expression on her face. The son-in-law had encountered some trouble, and the young miss didn't seem to be very happy either. How good would it be if she could help the son-in-law? The sound of footsteps came from outside the door. Xiao Huan raised her head, and saw the princess who often came to the house walking in. She could see princesses every day, and more than one of them. She was already immune to princesses. Xiao Huan, brew a cup of tea. Li Yi casually stretched out his hand as a greeting and said, "Sit anywhere." The maidservant looked around. There wasn't even a chair here. Did the son-in-law want the princess to sit on the floor? Guild leader, you shouldn't be so free lately, right? Li Yi asked lazily as he looked at the princess. Emingzi didn't sit down. She looked at him and said, "The specific things are naturally done by the subordinates. I'm not that busy." Li Yi sat up from the chair and looked at her. How could she not be busy? The women's union didn't bring all the women together to hold a party every day to discuss which perfume smelled better, or which brassiere was more stylish. They clearly could do more things. Emingzi looked at him and asked, when the women of the noble families in the capital unite, they can indeed do some practical things for more women. How did you think of it? Li Yi stood up from the chair and said, what do you mean, how did I think of it? The women's union is the crystallization of the wisdom of the women in the capital. What does it have to do with me? The princess nodded and said, I always feel that the women's union can do more than help the court implement the law of delaying the age of marriage for women. What do you think? Li Yi waved his hand and said, I don't understand the matters of you women. Say a few words. Emingzi looked at him and said, delaying the age of marriage for women and standardizing the midwifery procedures were all proposed by you. I really don't understand. Say it. Li Yi hesitated for a moment and said, then I'll simply say a few words. I'm all ears. The princess said as she sat in the chair that Li Yi had just sat in. This women's union, of course, has more than just that. Women are of low status and are often bullied. In this case, even the government sometimes doesn't give them justice according to the law. Your women's union can act as an umbrella for these women. While standardizing the law, you can also return a clear sky to the capital. After the implementation of the new marriage law, it will make the lives of many poor families in the capital more difficult. You can provide these women, who have reached the age of 13, with jobs that they can do. For example, embroidery, printing and dyeing, perfume workshop, soap workshop. These jobs are actually suitable for women, so that they can support themselves, and even the whole family. Open up a female school, pick out some talented women, and focus on training them. For example, female doctors, female accountants, female shopkeepers, female spies, female assassins, and so on. Our business will grow bigger and bigger in the future, so we can't do without these. Female spies, female assassins? Emingzi looked at him in surprise. What does this have to do with business? This is not important. Li Yi waved his hand and said, embroidery, printing, and weaving are more important. Let Li Xian improve the loom, and also improve the recipe of dyes. Don't make cloth, make clothes. Forget it, you don't need to worry about this. I'll arrange it. Women's school, you have to pay enough attention to it. Don't teach women's commandments, don't read women's biography, learn management, learn technology. 2 hours later, Li Yi drank the tea that Xiao Huan brought over in one gulp and said, I'll just say a few words. Do you remember? Emingzi nodded, then shook her head and said, to do so many things, I'm afraid it will cost a lot of money. The national treasury is already tight. They won't use the extra money on these things. The imperial court? Li Yi curled his lips. If the imperial court wanted to interfere, he wouldn't agree to it. Li Yi looked at the princess and asked, are you short of money? Is Li Xian short of money? I'm short of money. I'm short of money. Emingzi thought for a while, then shook her head and said, not short of money. Li Yi asked again, since we are not short of money, why do we need to ask the imperial court? Does this matter have anything to do with the imperial court? Emingzi thought for a while, but still didn't understand what he meant. Why don't you say a few more words? Li Yi sighed and said, then I'll say a few more words. 2 hours later, the princess stood up and looked at Li Yi and said, I understand. Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief and patted her shoulder. With an extremely serious expression, he said, good luck, I believe in you. Chapter 532. Something is not quite right. Before the princess left, she suddenly turned around and looked at Li Yi with bright eyes. Just now he had said a few more words. Li Yi was very thirsty. He held a pot of tea and gulped it down. Hearing this, he put down the teapot and asked, what is wrong? The princess showed a thoughtful expression and said, you usually avoid trouble when you can, and you don't say a word more if you can. Why are you so attentive this time? There must be something wrong. Looking at Mingzhu's slightly suspicious eyes, Li Yi wanted to throw the teapot in his hand at her. F***ck. I just said a few more words. What's wrong? Do you think I have any ulterior motives? If you were the first prince instead of the eldest princess, I wouldn't have to do these things and say these words. I have nothing better to do. At the risk of being checked by the court, I helped to implement the new marriage law. And I stayed up late to write the script. I even had a few pimples on my face. I also had to hire the internet water army to fan the flames and create public opinion. It was not easy for me to do all this. It was good to sell perfume and underwear. Why would I care about the happiness of the women in the world? Whether their thoughts were independent or not, and whether their consciousness of struggle was awakened. What a heartless fellow. Why didn't she take a look at who was the one getting the benefits? All she did was casually show her blade in the imperial court, and earned her reputation and money. When the two ideas he had just said became reality, who knew what she would get? Now, she was actually suspecting that he had ulterior motives? Without him, she would still be grounded. Xiaohuan, see the guest out. Li Yi lay back on the chair, and was extremely disappointed. He didn't look at her again, and ordered the little maid. The little maid looked ahead blankly. That was the princess. How could he see her out? Emingzu wants to open a girls' school? Emperor Jing turned his head and looked. He shook his head and said, according to what the empress said, the scale of this girls' school is really rare in the world. It can be called another directorate. The national treasury has always been tight, but there is no extra money for her to toss about. Although women's schools were rare among the common people, they were indispensable to those scholarly families and aristocratic families. The girls in the family had to enter the women's school at an early age. Aside from learning the 4 arts of zither, chess, calligraphy and painting, as well as poetry and classics, they also had to learn the women's reflections and women's training, which were related to women's virtues, women's duties, and the etiquette of the boudoir. He was not surprised that Emingzu wanted to do something for women these days, and wanted to open a girls' school. However, if they followed her plan, it would cost a lot of money. The national treasury was already tight, so it was impossible to use the money on these things. The empress put a bowl of soup on the table in front of Emperor Jing and said, Your Majesty guessed wrong this time. Emingzu did not want to take money from the national treasury. Emperor Jing asked doubtfully, without an investment of 100,000 taels of silver, I'm afraid it will be difficult to succeed. Where will she get the money? The empress smiled and said, Your Majesty, do you know what is the most profitable business in Jingdo? Jing Emperor drank a mouthful of soup and turned to look at her. He had to deal with countless government affairs every day. How could he have the energy to care about these things? It's perfume. The empress looked at him and said, In the palace, from the concubines to the palace maids, even the little princesses use perfume. It is very popular outside the palace. Every time a new product is released, it will set off a wave in the circle of the noble ladies in the city. Your Majesty, do you know how much this inch-tall bottle of perfume sells for? Emperor Jing shook his head. Li Yi said that he could not smell perfume, so the palace maids around him were not allowed to use it. The empress never used it, so he was not very clear about this. 10 taels of silver. The empress shook her head and looked at him. 1 bottle is 10 taels of silver. Even so, there are still countless people scrambling for it. What's more, perfume is only one of the industries under Mingzhu's name. The profits of soap and liquor are not inferior to perfume. To be honest, I do not know how much wealth Mingzhu has now. Emperor Jing was surprised and said, These things have such a big profit. In just half a year, she can easily take out 100,000 taels of silver? 100,000 taels of silver was not a small amount. It should be known that the annual tax revenue of the Jing kingdom was only 10 million strings of silver. In the past 2 years there had been disasters. Last year's tax revenue was only 8 million strings of silver. It was incredible that Emingzu alone had a wealth of 100,000 or more in such a short period of time. This is all thanks to your Majesty's county early. The empress smiled and said, Not only Emingzu, but Xianer has also earned a lot of money in the past 6 months. I have received their filial piety these days. My hands are tired. He did not want to be a good county earl, but learned to do those profit-seeking things like a businessman. Emperor Jing shook his head and asked, What has Li Yi been doing these days? Changda's figure appeared behind him and said, Your Majesty, County Early has been playing around with the two princesses these days. What else? Seeing that Changde did not speak again after saying one sentence, Emperor Jing looked back and asked after a while. Your Majesty, nothing else. Changde shook his head and said. Emperor Jing was stunned and asked, he only plays with Yongning Shaning every day? Changde nodded and said, County Early said that this is to let Princess Yongning relax and help her illness. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said helplessly, I don't know where he learned his medical skills. Although it seems absurd, it is effective. Forget it. Changde thought for a while and said, County Early also said that because His Majesty summoned Princess Yongning to the palace twice and interrupted the treatment, she needs another 10 days of treatment. Treatment? Emperor Jing frowned and asked, What do you mean? It means that because His Majesty summoned the princess to the palace for 3 days, the princess needs to stay in County Early's mansion for another 10 days. Changde said, Nonsense. Emperor Jing slammed the table and said, A monarch does not joke. I said 2 months, so it is 2 months. Not a day more, not a day less. You actually blame me for summoning Yongning into the palace? Why? Can't I see my own daughter? Changde sighed and said, County Early said that the last 10 days are very important. If something goes wrong, I am afraid that all the previous efforts will be wasted. Her Royal Highness may become like before. Hearing this, Emperor Jing's body shook slightly. How could he forget that stupid expression and empty eyes? After a moment of silence, he gritted his teeth and said, 10 days, forget it. 10 days is 10 days. Thinking of another thing, Emperor Jing suddenly asked, Where did Shaning go? Why haven't I seen her these days? Changde pondered for a moment and said, Didn't His Majesty order that Princess Shaning can go out of the palace these days? Only then did Emperor Jing remember that Shoning had thrown a tantrum and threatened to go on a hunger strike. He had a headache before he agreed. In these 2 months, he could go out of the palace to see Yongning. Did she go every day? After a while, an angry voice came from the Hall of Diligent Government. Is it not enough to kidnap my daughter? Do you want to kidnap another one? Chapter 533. Yongning's condition is more urgent. Should we add a few more courses of treatment? Li Yi thought about it carefully and felt that the old emperor wouldn't agree. According to the information he got from Changde, it might be a big risk if he pushed it further. Forget it, it's better not to take this risk. After fooling around for 10 more days, there was still half a month left to squander. Yongning didn't realize at all that she would return to the palace in half a month. She ran in the yard, picked up the paper planes that had flown out, and let out a crisp laughter. Xiao Chui and Xiao Zhu were very depressed, because the distance the two of them flew with their paper planes was not as far as Yongning, not to mention that she was still a little girl. This made the two big sisters suffer quite a blow. Li glanced at them. It would be a miracle if they could fly past Yongning. He had found the method of folding paper airplanes from a book called Advanced Paper Airplanes Encyclopedia. He had accidentally glanced at it and saw it as Advanced Paper Airplanes Encyclopedia. He had wondered how such a book could be placed in the provincial library. Airplanes were also divided into high and low levels. And did it need to be taught? This is the account for the past half a month. Have a look. Zheng Zimo threw a thick account book in front of him. Yes, he was now at Zheng Zimo's place again. Of course, it wasn't because he wanted to marry Miss Zheng and have children. It was because Yongning insisted on pestering him to come over every time. In the past few days he had heard little bunnies be good, flying bugs, and where is spring? To be honest, seeing Yongning and Miss Zheng being so close, he actually felt a kind of sour feeling in his heart. So what if she was beautiful and sang well? Li Yi tore 2 pieces of paper from the back of the account book and folded 2 paper planes. However, because the paper was too thin, they didn't fly very far. He was too lazy to do such a boring thing as looking at the account book. He reached out to grab a handful of melon seeds and asked casually, Where is Ruoqing? Seeing that half of the seeds in front of her were gone, Zheng Zimo silently moved the bag of seeds closer to her and said, He went to the underwear store and will be back at night. Since yesterday, Yongning had said that she wanted to eat osmanthus cake several times. In fact, Li Yi also wanted to eat it. With the same ingredients and the same method, the taste of the cake he made was far from the one made by Wan Ruoqing. Li Yi always suspected that she had some ancestral secret that she didn't tell him. While looking at the latest lingerie illustration designed by Tseng Zumo, he was munching on melon seeds. Although the style was still a little conservative, it had a unique flavor. No wonder those men couldn't hold themselves back when they saw it. Li Yi looked at the album, and then looked at Tseng Zumo. He imagined a certain scene, and felt that he wouldn't be able to hold himself back if it were him. "Why are you looking at me?" Tseng Zumo subconsciously hit back. She always felt that Li Yi's eyes could see through her clothes, and see the purple underwear she was wearing today. It was an indescribable strange feeling. "I won't lose a piece of flesh just by looking," Li Yi said and rubbed his nose. Fortunately, it wasn't bleeding, but he didn't dare to look again. Once you started eating melon seeds, you couldn't stop. Li Yi finished the one in his hand. When he reached out again, he found that Tseng Zumo was holding the bag in her hand and looking at him angrily. She looked at Li Yi and said, "That's all there is left." Li Yi curled his lips. "Tisk, it's just melon seeds, and it's even the original flavor. It's as rare as anything." If he told her that melon seeds had 5-spice, cream, jujube and cucumber flavor, wouldn't this woman go crazy? If it was in the future, he wouldn't want such disgusting melon seeds, even if they were given to him. "Look, what's that?" Li Yi inadvertently glanced behind Tseng Zumo, and suddenly widened his eyes. He said with great surprise, "Guanyin Bodhisattva has appeared." "What?" Tseng Zumo hurriedly turned around. When she saw the empty sky without even a single cloud, she finally realized something. Li Yi held the embroidered bag in his hand, and ignored Tseng Zumo's murderous eyes. He pointed at a style of underwear and said, "This color can be a little more colorful, a little wilder." Tseng Zumo glared at Li Yi and stood up angrily. When she turned around and walked to Yongning, she immediately put on a smile and said, "Cindy, come here. Sister will help you fly." Okay. Yongning said happily. She looked at Li Yi and found that he had his back to her. She quietly ran to Tseng Zumo and whispered, "Show Sister Tseng come here. I'll tell you a secret." "What secret does Cindy want to tell sister?" Tseng Zumo squatted down and asked with a smile. Yongning looked at Li Yi again and whispered, "Last time I asked brother if he liked Sister Tseng. Brother said he liked her." Tseng Zumo was startled. She could roughly guess what the scene was like at the time. However, she still had a little expectation in her heart. She asked, "How did Cindy ask?" "Cindy first." Seeing the little girl's serious answer, Tseng Zumo shook her head. It was not much different from what she had guessed. However, he was probably just coaxing the little girl. How could he like her? She pinched Yongning's little face and felt inexplicably disappointed. However, she still smiled and said, "Come, sister will help you fly. By the way, why is this called a paper plane? What is a plane?" Yongning didn't answer this question. She said mysteriously, "Also, brother said last time that he wanted to marry Sister Tseng as a concubine and bring Sister Tseng home." "What is a concubine? When will sister come home with us?" Tseng Zumo's body shook, and the smile on her face froze. The paper plane in her hand also fell to the ground. Li Yi looked at Tseng Zumo walking back to the room with her head down. She didn't seem to be in a good mood. "It can't be, just because I ate a small bag of melon seeds." "Hey, what's wrong with you? I'll return the melon seeds to you." "It can't be. How about I buy a big bag for you?" Hey, why did you close the door?" Seeing her go in and close the door, Li Yi stood up in shock. He was a little confused. "It's just a few melon seeds." Qin Manor, in a certain exquisite courtyard. "Congratulations on your recovery, Brother Qin." "Congratulations, young Duke Qin." "Young Duke Qin has just recovered from his injury, so it's not suitable for you to drink. This toast is for you." Young Duke Qin was an influential figure in the capital's foppish circle. Not only was his status respected, but his luck was also different from others. He was violently beaten by Crown Prince Li Xian, slapped in the face by Li Xianzi, and grounded by Prime Minister Qin for half a year. It was not easy for him to end his grounding early. But in less than 2 days, he was seriously injured by a righteous man who saw injustice, because he molested a woman on the street. Several of his ribs were broken, and he had been recuperating at home until today. Such a bumpy experience made those who saw it sad, and those who heard it cry. Everyone was watching with wide eyes to see what the next unfortunate thing that young Duke Qin would encounter would be. There were only 2 people who could sit at the same table as Qinyu. Cui Qinyu took a sip of wine and asked, "That thief still hasn't been caught?" Chen Lijun shook his head and said, "That person acted decisively. Before the officers arrived, he had already left the city, although he left his name behind. For people like that, once they escape, it will be as difficult as ascending to the heavens to catch them again." "It's fine." Qinyu shrugged as if he didn't care much about this matter. He asked, "I heard that your highness also left the palace." "Just 2 days ago." Cui Qinyu nodded and said, "With your highness's temper, why didn't you find trouble with that person?" Qinyu raised his eyebrows and asked, "You mean Li?" Cui Qinyu glanced at him. The hand of a servant girl who was pouring wine for him suddenly trembled, and the wine spilled on the table. The servant girl with the long scar on her face turned pale, and hurriedly wiped it with her sleeve. Cui Qinyu frowned and said, Okay, put it here, I'll do it myself. Besides that Li Xianzi who is deeply favored by the emperor. Oh, I should call him Li Xianbui now. Besides him, who else could it be?" Qinyu's mouth pulled into a strange smile. Cui Qinyu shook his head and said, "With his current status, no matter what, your highness can't do anything to him." After your highness left the palace, your highness closed your door and didn't go out. I heard from the servants of the prince's mansion that your highness only read books every day, and seems to have completely changed your temperament. Cui Qinyu's voice gradually became smaller. The servant girl with the scar on her face retreated to the back. She lowered her head and bit her lips. Her eyes were extremely complicated. Chapter 534. Xiao Cui, come here. Yong Ning and Shaning were playing house in the yard. Li Yi sat on the stone bench and waved at Xiao Cui. "Li, what's the matter?" Xiao Cui ran over. "Is your young mistress on her period these days?" Although he knew that it was inappropriate to ask this question, Zheng Zimo had ignored him for a long time because of those melon seeds. Miss Zheng wasn't that stingy, so Li Yi felt that the problem should be in other areas. When Xiao Cui heard this, she was stunned for a moment. Then, her face turned so red that it looked like blood was about to drip out. This kind of thing about a woman, how could she casually tell others? If she said something like this, the young mistress would beat her to death if she knew. No, in a few days. Thinking of this, Xiao Cui said with a red face. "I see." Li Yi shook his head. "If it wasn't for that reason, what else could it be?" Xiao Cui lowered her head and muttered, "I don't know what's wrong with the young mistress these days. She's always in a daze and often forgetful. The young mistress has never been like this before. In short, it's very strange." Inside the room, Zheng Zimo sat at the table with a brush in her hand. Her eyes were slightly unfocused, and the rice paper in front of her was blank. The knocking continued for a long time before she heard it. She put down the brush and said, "The door isn't closed. Come in." Crash. Li Yi threw a big bag on the table, looked at her and said, "Salt and pepper flavor, 5 spices flavor, cream flavor, red dates flavor, plum flavor. I just ate a few of your melon seeds. Is there a need to be so angry for so long?" Zheng Zimo was stunned. She opened one of the small bags, and a strange fragrance wafted out. She tasted one, and the expression on her pretty face changed slightly. Then, she put them all away and said to Li Yi, "When was I angry?" It was a woman's nature to refuse to admit it. She almost wrote the word angry on her face. "How dare you say you're not angry? If you're not angry, then give me back my melon seeds. You mentioned a clothing store yesterday. What's going on?" Zheng Zimo deliberately changed the topic. Li Yi shook his head, and was finally able to speak normally. He said, "The fame of underwear has already spread. We can expand our business and make ready-made clothes. In addition to the common styles, We can also design some new styles and divide the sizes. Whichever one the customer likes, they can wear it directly after paying the bill. In this era, there were no clothing stores. There were only cloth shops. Small families would buy cloth at home and cut it into their own clothes. Rich families would hire a tailor to make it, so there was no concept of ready-made clothes for the time being. Food, clothing, housing, and transportation. No matter what era it was, people couldn't live without these four things. If you were to engage in these four industries, you would never have to worry about being eliminated by the times. Although she would be involved in the ready-made clothing industry together with Her Royal Highness, she had always contributed money, manpower, and effort. She would just sit back and wait for her share of the profits. She would not ask about the management. Sung Zimo said while eating melon seeds. After opening 2 new underwear stores, there is a lack of manpower. If we want to open a ready-made clothing store, we will need more women who are good at needlework. I'm afraid the brothel will not be able to find so many. Li waved his hand and said, "Don't worry about this. There will be no shortage of manpower soon." Near the capital, the new marriage law was enforced. In the following period of time, there would be many women between the ages of 13 and 16, staying at home doing nothing. This was also a headache for the court. If they could have something to do and solve the problem of employment for women of the right age, the court would definitely strongly support it. Then when Sister Ruoqing comes back, I will discuss it with her. Sung Zimo said, then looked at Li Yi and said, I have something to ask you. What? Li Yi looked back at her. You. Sung Zimo opened her mouth and thought about it. In the end, she didn't say anything. She waved her hand and said, Forget it, it's nothing. It was very impolite to not finish a sentence, especially for people with obsessive-compulsive disorder. This time, Li Yi was not in a hurry to leave. He looked at her and asked, What is it? Nothing, you can go. Sung Zimo waved her hand impatiently. Really? Really? Then let me grab a handful of melon seeds before I go. I want the creamy ones. The Wang family village was a small village less than 10 miles away from the capital. Although the Wang family village was located outside the most prosperous capital of the Jing kingdom, it didn't have much of the capital's glory. The dozens of families in the village relied on the thin fields at the front of the village to eat. When the year was good, they could drink thin rice every meal. When the year was bad, the family had to tighten their belts and pray for God's blessing. Wang Lauer was an ordinary villager in the Wang family village. At this time, he was squatting on a rock in the yard, smoking a pipe and sighing. Dad, it's time to eat. A little girl about 10 years old, wearing coarse clothes and an apron, came out of the dilapidated house. She walked in front of him and said timidly, Eat, eat, eat. You only know how to eat all day. You won't be able to get married. Wang Lauer was angry when he saw his third daughter, and waved his hand impatiently. Seeing this, the little girl's body trembled, and hurriedly retreated back into the house. Wang Lauer put the pipe on the rock and coughed and said angrily, What is the court doing? Are they trying to kill me? His wife was disappointing and gave him 3 daughters in a row. Although he still had a strong desire to have a son, he didn't dare to have another one. If he gave birth to a daughter, he wouldn't be able to continue living. Although they were daughters, they were also his children. Although they were often beaten and scolded, they had been living in poverty for more than 10 years, and they had grown up one by one. His eldest daughter was 14 years old, and had just been engaged. The second daughter was 13 years old, and was also at the age to get married. He thought that if his 2 daughters got married, there would be 2 mouths to feed at home, and he would have betrothal gifts from 2 families, so he could live a better life. However, he didn't expect that his eldest daughter would get married in a month. The court suddenly issued an order that women couldn't get married before they were 16 years old. This delayed the 2 children all of a sudden. Wang Lauer suddenly felt a lot of pressure, and couldn't live anymore. King Court, they don't let people live. Wang Lauer scolded angrily. A middle-aged woman poked her head out of the house and said, Keep your voice down. If someone hears you, you'll be punished. It would have been better if she hadn't said it. As soon as this matter was brought up, Wang Lauer became even angrier. He jumped down from the rock and scolded. What's going on? They're allowed to have children, but I'm not allowed to talk about it. I just want to talk about it. This F** King Court, they even care about me marrying off my daughter. Wang Lauer, who are you calling a F** King dog? Following this voice, an official dressed in black walked in from outside. This F** King Wang Ergu. He owes me 2 copper coins and hasn't paid me back in a month. Wang Lauer looked at the official with a fawning expression and asked, Sir, what brings you here today? The official waved his hand and flipped through a booklet in his hand. He went straight to the point and said, Wang Lauer, your Zhaodi and Indi are both over 13 years old, right? When Wang Lauer heard this, he was stunned for a moment. His expression immediately changed and he said warily, Sir, my Zhaodi and Indi are both betrothed. I don't care if they are betrothed or not, as long as they are over 13 years old. Oh right, you're Liodi. Wang Lauer's face was full of fear. My Liodi is only 10 years old. She is still a child. The official glanced at her and directly asked. It's said that if any family has a girl who is over 13 years old and has good sewing skills, she can work in the workshop. She will work for 8 hours a day and will be paid 10 copper coins. Will your family's Zhaodi and Indi go? No. Wang Lauer shook his head repeatedly. How could he believe the official's nonsense? 10 copper coins for 8 hours a day? He couldn't even earn that much even if he worked 16 hours a day. Was he trying to trick his own daughter? All right, then I'll remember it. The official waved his hand and turned to leave. Wang Lauer was stunned when he heard this. He left just like that, and didn't want to force him? What if he scared him a little more and he agreed? Dad. A figure hurriedly ran in from outside. It was a 13 or 14-year-old girl who panted and said, Dad, I heard that Her Royal Highness's workshop is recruiting people. For the first 3 months, it will be 10 copper coins a day. After 3 months, it will be 15 copper coins a day. Is it true? Wang Lauer asked with his eyes wide open. It's true. The girl nodded repeatedly and said, There is a notice outside. The official is going from door to register. I heard that the quota is limited this time. I saw the official just now. Dad, did you register me in Indi? Wang Lauer was stunned again. After he came to his senses, he ran outside. Sir, don't go. I'm willing. You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.